This understanding is reflected in the substantial ongoing investment that we see in restoration projects within this area. A little bit of background, Sugar Beach is a large area that spans about 5 miles. Because of its sheer size, we've broken it up into 4 areas. We've got WFW, Eagle Rocks, Sugar and Sugar Left. This project is designed to help restore river function through enhancements to river connectivity and complexity to do with habitat and suitability for juvenile Chinook and steelhead. Project actions have been developed specifically to address limiting factors and ecological concerns that upper salmon recovery planetization resources identify, protect and improve conditions for rearing juvenile salmon. The biological strategy ranks peripheral and transitional habitats and increasing extreme complexity as number 1 and number 2 priorities in the reach. This project will specifically address floodplain connectivity, off-channel and side channels, and cover in wood. Floodplain connectivity, complex in-stream structures, balance, the absence of barriers, which in this case is anthropogenic features that are constricting river process. In large intact riparian zones are all features of natural stream and watershed processes. By addressing these factors, it will result in immediate benefit long-term change to natural watershed and fluid processes. However, there are considerations that need to be made in order to restore river process in a built environment. This doesn't make any of our projects less important, just makes it a little bit more complex. To quote RTT's rationale behind interest in process-based restoration, processes must be designed so they function not only within the geomorphic context of the stream region, but also the soil context. Just as projects are assigned without consideration to things like stream flow, sediment dynamics, and geomorphology will fail or not provide long-term benefits, projects that are designed without considerations of the landowners and public support either won't get built or won't help foster the community support for ongoing restoration efforts. At Sugar Levee site, people see the removal of the lofty pole. It's great, but of the community support and the considerations of the site, it's not feasible at this time. But there's still a lot we can do at this site. The project that I'm presenting today is the result of nearly a decade of community conversations and developing relationships. And these conversations present us with a unique opportunity to restore processes and reach in this really beneficial scale. And this has started with a series of acquisitions. This is a large project. Like I said, it spans about 5 miles. And the scale of the project itself allows for some really unique reach scale connections. Threats to the reach under the existing condition are present because of areas where process is currently constrained. Constraints on river process associated with a large levee feature have resulted in accelerated erosion, and some of the landowners downstream of this levee are currently pursuing carting options. The Yakima Nation is seeking funding to buy a numerous of these properties through floodplains by design to help eliminate the immediate risk to our landowners. This project will complement the actions Yakimas are pursuing by working to affect the process and increase the activation of the opposite floodplain and help reduce some of that dangerous. Like I said, both projects that both teams are pursuing are complementary. In re-engaging processes at the site will help reduce the continued reduction of floodplain and sale channel engagement. At the WDFW site, there's some irrigation infrastructure that the project itself will help maintain its functionality. And the project is also looking to work with landowners to prevent additional development in floodplain areas, we're currently working on additional acquisition in the Sugar Works area. So the project itself draws from points of work by Columbia Salmon Recovery Board, Bureau Reclamation, and others. These organizations have been working to understand the geomorphology and the biology of our community in order to develop good projects. We live in a valley. Much of the land along the river is private, and because of the terrain, roads and utilities often parallel rivers. So there is infrastructure that is interacting with the river. As a result, community support is critical in our projects. We have ongoing conversations with landowners, irrigator officials to help on the needs and interests to develop a shared vision as we develop projects, including one. Some important things we get from feedback from our stakeholders is the need to maintain necessary protections, the need to maintain function for irrigation infrastructure, in this case for the Maha Valley Irrigation District and the Barkley Irrigation Canal. River safety is also a really important conversation. We have ongoing dialogues with landowners and recreational groups regarding wood and boater safety to increase the understanding that it's important and improve our standards to help maintain safety. Our local fishing guides have quickly come to understand that the restoration work we're doing is also really good for their business. Establishing and understanding everyone's vision allows us to come up with shared vision so that we can scale the project appropriately and set achievable goals. The project has landowner support and signed acknowledgement forms for all the properties where we are proposing work. We've also received a variety of public support letters from others, including WDFW, Bureau Reclamation, the TWISP, Oakland County, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the Colville Tribes. So in order to achieve our goals, we work to establish an organizational structure that would help support collaboration amongst the group of stakeholders. We established a development team, which includes the core of Maha Salmon personnel, representatives from the Tributary Committee, and Bureau Reclamation. In addition to the expertise on the PDT, MSRF has experienced ecologists and biologists on staff that help bring decades of expertise to our projects. We've received additional project participation from the Tributary Committees, some of whom sit on our project development team. We have done frequent check-ins with the committee itself. WDW, DNR, Colville Tribes, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. The project has also been receiving substantial technical support from BPA and Bureau Reclamation. For this project, we've routined 2 design teams, Interfluve and Wolfwater Resources, both of which bring extensive geomorphic and engineering experience to the project. This project has secured design funding from Bureau Reclamation, BPA, and SRFB, RCO, and we're following standard check-ins at the design milestones. It's a big project, and it has the potential and is being designed to provide reach scale benefits. We are proposing to place 44 wood complexity structures to help provide immediate benefit for short to medium term. We are looking to protect and restore 2.6 miles of side channel, which will provide immediate benefit for low flow channels. And they're being designed so that river process maintains them for medium to long-term benefit. We're taking the same approach with the floodplain channels, and we're looking at restoring and protecting about 2.9 miles. And we would also be restoring 11 acres of floodplain, which provide benefit at the first high water and persist for long term. There is a robust riparian component to this project, which will provide increasing benefit over time for long term. And this includes both planted and the expectation that the activated will encourage a lot of volunteers. So now I'm going to go ahead and jump into the site tour. Brian, I am going to bring up the video here shortly. Perhaps you can do some narration of the video and give my voice a little bit of a break. And then I can talk through go ahead and talk through the rest of the project elements. So just as a point of reference, we started WWW work site. You're going to see a photo. The star marks the photo location, and the yellow line marks the path of the drone flight that you'll see here.
Okay, so this is looking down the looking downstream in the channel. You can see some of the project elements from the 2013 project on the right side of the screen. One of the major issues that things we're working with is the irrigation structure on the left channel and the fish return, and looking at rebalancing flow so that the river maintains flow through both channels. And we're also putting in complexity structures on the in this left channel, the left split, along in the area around that riprap bank, and some complexity on the bar on the right. Thing in this photo, you can see one of the structures that's built in 2012. I'm just going through the bottom of the screen now, and moving on through the rest. Okay, so looking at the this is again the overview of the project's the WDFW project work site. There's a couple of there are going on. One of them at the upstream end, which was not included in the drone flight. We are doing some selective grading and installing a wood complexity structure to reconnect a floodplain channel. The floodplain channel will be active at basically the annual flow and above, flowing down through an existing channel that goes through and reconnects down into the Plum Pond area. And again, that would move that floodplain channel from active at roughly the 2-year above to being active at an annual flow. In the middle of the project, we will be putting an additional part of development wood complexity structure, and doing some selective channel grading to help rebalance flow, to maintain flow down both splits, ensuring ensuring that there's habitat in both sides, and as well as maintaining flow past the fish return, which is sort of right there where I think they're indicating the location. And we have some complexity structures in the left, the split channel east of the left side as well. We looked at doing additional complexity in a split channel west, but determined it wasn't that basically the cost value wasn't there. That there's already some really good complexity through there, and the impacts both to the river and to the right parent zone would make it so then it wouldn't outweigh the cost. I think
I'll throw in for a second here that this is a site that a lot of people have seen over the last 15 years. We removed the whole channel scanning dam at this site, and this is really a continuation to help that restoration process that was initiated in the early 2000s reach its full potential. We expected at that moment we took out the dam and started the project that we would be back doing adaptive actions and building that process to let the river expand its development reaction so that we didn't try and do the entire project at once. So what you're seeing here is really sort of the philosophy that Mount Salmon brings, continuing to engage with the site until we've reached the potential of the site. Brian indicated we would not be doing any large-scale construction split channel west. We will continue to work with Fish and Wildlife, however, to make sure that we don't just plantings and the existing wood structures that have been built in there continue to provide good habitat. Brian, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Going down at the next, this slide basically Terry, I can go back to the photos. Yes, this slide shows views both down and upstream. The dam that Chris mentioned was across the west channel, across the east channel, basically the location of that just downstream APAC diversion. The project will also be taking out the remnant fish ladder on the island, and then when we took out the dam, the expectation was that the river would mobilize the bar deposit that was upstream of the diversion to help maintain the channel length and flow down both channels, but it has not done so. The river has not done so, and that's one of the things that the project looking to address. The other view, the photo on the right, is looking upstream, and on the left side of the photo, towards the center of the slide, you can see the active vegetation or the vegetation along the floodplain channel that would be active, that we're seeking to increase the activity of, along with some of the wood structures. The three wood structures in the middle of the photo are similar to the one that's proposed. It would be just downstream, on the downstream to that photo. On the right side of that image is the combined MVID east and Berkeley irrigation canal diversion, which was built by Reclamation in 2009, and that diversion has ample capacity to provide the water for both irrigation systems. And it's worth noting that those two irrigation systems are the two largest in the Meha Valley. With that, I think the next slide takes us to the Eagle Rocks work site. And Terry, you want to jump back in? I think
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks a lot, Brian. So next, moving downstream to the Eagle Rocks work site, and the two studies are going to mark some photo locations and then an indication of the drone path that you will see here just shortly. So we're traveling downstream. This image itself is about 8,000 CFS from May 2020. Along left bank there is a high, relatively unvegetated terrace. There's a couple plantings along that zone that were previously placed that have been not entirely successful because of the elevation difference from the planting surface to the river. Coming around the corner here, you can see an unvegetated area on left bank, again in high terrace. And you've got a mid-channel bar where the flow splits. The dominant flow path is to the right, but there is a flow path through low, medium flows, tough flows along that left channel path. Back in the far distance there, the river dives off out of sight. That's the sugar levee, to give you a sense of how the two project areas relate. So what we've got here is we've got draft 30% design. We'll be finalizing 30% based off of viewer feedback over the coming weeks. At the upper side, we're going to have some bank marginality features. As we finalize 3%, we're going to look at decreasing the size of structures, but increasing the quantity of them. Our hope is this will provide covered water area and also help reduce some of the costs. We're going to be investigating some options to make some large singular trees that we have noticed in the reach just upstream from this site that have been huge meccas for fish. Our biologists have literally asked, can we do something like this? So we're going to look at options to incorporate some large branchy trees into that project element. So there will be more refinement as we finalize 30 and move into 60% of that project area. Associated with these margin structures, we've also got some benching. This benching will help increase some channel capacity, but it also provide a really great place for a robust riparian zone. So we're looking to really increase that buffer, enhance and improve the riparian that's there, add a bunch of additional riparian plantains. That bench itself will activate about a 1-year flow. Moving downstream, we've got that channel slit where you've got that mid-channel bar. There's a series of structure upstream and that provides geomorphic influence to encourage that flow split. We've got grading associated with this project proposal in the channel itself. There's a series of wood structures along left bank. We're refining these wood structures. So the upper wood structures are designed to provide some cover habitat at medium to high flows, but are not looking to provide scour pools so that over time, as river processes evolve, as we see changes in flow regimes associated with climate change, this project site is resilient, and that fish have the opportunity to transition downstream to the structures that provide some scour and some pools, and into the main dam as flows may drop in the channel. So to bring you back to the site itself, if we were standing on that left bank at the location of where we're proposing to do those bank margin structures, this is what you'd see from the river. It's relatively high. We don't see that get wet on a biologically meaningful scale. Modeling show that at really high flows it get wet, but we certainly don't see that at 1, 2, even 5 flows. There's no complexity along this reach, which is probably one of the reasons upstream where we've got a big ponderosa pond. The fish are just gathering it. So we're looking to build some complexity in the stream itself. And build that riparian zone so we've got that long-term impact from the riparian for cover and also additional input to the river. If we were to take a ride up into an airport or hitch a ride on a drone that location and go upwards, what we would see is those two upper photos. The photo at high water and the photo on the right is at low water. In the low corner at both those sites, there's a frequently used put in. And so this gives you a really good idea of it's a relatively straight stretch of river. We are evaluating all our projects relative to recreational use and safety. There's a ton of visibility here. Structures will be accounted for recreational use. Lots of visibility both for the margin structures and then also off here in the distance, and we'll switch to some photos down here, is that tip of that channel we're proposing some structures. So great site visibility for all proposed. So these are 2 drone shots looking at mid-channel bar and the associated flows. The picture on the left, low flow. This is pretty much base flow, looking at just under 300 CFS. You can see there's some area in that channel, but there's really not water going through the channel itself. The project is looking to improve the base low flow conditions of the site. The expectation is that habitat quality of the site is going to improve through the entire flows. On the right side, we've got high water. So this channel provides some great velocity refuge to fish. Moving down the stream, we're at the Sugar Reach Project work site. We'll have a couple different photo locations there marked by the stars, and then a long drone flight as well to provide orientation to the site. We're moving downstream, approaching the sugar levee itself. You can see there's a large, relatively unvegetated area directly behind the sugar levee. This is a placed fill. Spinning around the corner at the tail end of the levee, this picture was taken prior to the small action project we undertook at the inlet. So that's not shown in the video. But we've got what we refer to as the sugar side channel coming into view here. This channel right now is activated seasonally. It activates probably at about 1700 CFS, but it's not active during low flows. Far back to the left, just starting to move out of sight, we've got a high bank where we're seeing some accelerated erosion. That's one of the sites where landowners are looking to pursue bank hardening options. Coming into view, we're starting to look at the Sugar Left project area. We're looking to do some selective grading at some inlets of existing channel features along that floodplain to activate it additionally. To right there, in here is the location that we are seeing some accelerated erosion, and that's the location where Yakimas are pursuing some property acquisitions to reduce landowner risk. We're approaching a bedrock knob here. The Twist River comes in right here at the end of the project site. So this is their draft 30% designs. The elements capture are the same as we submitted under the con designs. We've got the structures on this are specifically the larger geophysical driving structures. So we've got 6 structures at locations either along the side or main stem. In addition to these wood structures, there are about 50 habitat structures that will be placed throughout the channels to provide additional complexity. Green areas mark areas of grading. So selective grading within existing channels to increase activation, and then also some selective grading at tail end of existing levee and fill area behind that levee. And that grading itself will help increase the activation of the side channel. So the channel, Sugar Side channel here, currently is a season channel. We would be looking to promote a perennial flow through this channel, both through placement of large wood structures on left bank and right bank, and some selective. With the placement of the wood structure on left bank, we would be doing additional grading alongside that structure, which will increase subseasonal floodplain activation of this upper left floodplain area. We are looking to increase channel length of side channel of Sugar Side channel. The current outlet comes through here, and we'd be looking to do some activation to increase that channel length. There's an existing high water channel that follows this path. We are not looking at specific actions within that channel. We have a little bit of grading here that will provide some relief to that channel as it's becoming a little bit more active with increased activation of the upper side channel to reduce risks to landowners downstream of that. But even this secondary channel here, conditions there will either stay as consistent with what we currently see or likely have improved flow through the upper reach. In the Sugar Left area, which is sort of marked as purple polygon, we've got a series of selective grading at the upper existing channel cuts. These channels will activate and be specifically to reduce strain risk. And they will disconnect likely first at the top and but remain connected for a longer period of time towards the bottom. Again, habitat structures will be placed throughout all of the channels and robust riparian components as well. So to reorient, thanks, Dave. To orient us to the south site, this is the upper end standing on the Sugar Levee. If we were to pop up in a drone, this is photo on the right is looking downstream and south. We've got the town back here. The confluence would be in the distance where the river comes out of sight here. So you can see we've got a series of homes back here. And you know, the location of infrastructure associated with it has been a really important consideration for this project. I mentioned there's a lot of interest of can we make this levee this way. At this is not an option at this site. So we've been looking at what we could do with this that provide most biological benefit that removal would do, but does include additional restoration actions at this site if additional opportunities arise. So we'd be looking to modify the tail end of this levee. That the levee itself is longer in length than is necessary to provide the needed actions. And then we would be looking to activate an appropriate portion of floodplain behind the levee as sort of backwater area. That work will also work to increase the perennial nature of the side channel at the tail end. So these photos are the side channel at the left. The photo on the left is the side channel prior to the inlet modification project, which is placed in 2020. It was a small action, less than $10,000, that looked to improve the flow through the inlet itself. So at the inlet of this channel, we've got this amazing wood structure. And this is what we're trying to put into the river. So we certainly don't want to take this out of the river. So instead we put ourselves upstream and built a new inlet to help activate this channel. So the Sugar Channel action itself has been really successful. It accomplished exactly what we were trying to do. It's provides a really peripheral and transitional habitat. This fish was this picture here was taken just this past 2 weeks by Grace, one of our biologists, and it's stock full of fish. The channel itself continues to be active as a channel. So this picture itself is about 1,700 CFS. The channel inlet is active, but the flow is essentially coming down and then returning back through the wood. So it's successful in that, we've got a lot of wetland. It's got some really great cover for those fish now. But the project itself didn't look at additional farther down the channel. The greater channel activation was not affected by this. The intent of this project was that it was a term that we return to the site as part of this project to do more work. Another important component is it helped to maintain landowner engagement. Projects of this size take a really long time to put on the ground. We've got landowners who are eager to see changes in this reach, specifically landowners who are experiencing sediment erosion. They under the impression that erosion is driven by hydraulic effects of the levee itself, and are eager to see what changes occur as part of the project, and have been willing to sort of slow the process of putting in bank hardening because they know this project is coming. So this project, the small action, did not do anything to affect those large-scale hydraulics, but the project that we are as part of this program will. These photos are, we're now downstream, actually looking upstream. So the confluence, the twist, this is kind of the twist happening here at the very bottom of the screen. We're sitting on a bluff, looking upstream at the Sugar Left project. We're looking at orient yourself. It's right on screen, but this is the Sugar Left project. Yeah. So, reference, the project itself being to activate a great deal more floodplain. So the intent of this project is to activate this floodplain, increase the robustness of the riparian. At this point is still pretty, but we will be protecting and maintaining that. Other than increasing the active river corridor by about 100 feet, our the project is being designed so there's increased capacity on this side to hope that it will help reduce some of the big stuff that is being experienced on the opposite bank where we've got private and public infrastructure. So the project itself is looking at taking advantage of existing terrain. So you can see on this relative terrain map that we've got a series of channels that are through this floodplain, and we're focusing our excavation at the upper edge of these in order to connect these channels. So we're ready to get rolling on this project. We have the support that we need from landowners, and we've got a lot of support from public officials as well. This is demonstrated in the submitted landowner forms and letters of support that we included in our application. We've secured funding for design. The preliminary designs will be completed this fall. WDFW, we are at final 30%. Eagle Rocks is a draft 30, and it will be finalized mid-October. Sugar 30% is to be delivered next week. And we'll move forward to 60% with concurrence from BPA and RCO. This presentation included a sneak peek looking at the 30% plan overview, which is 100% in line with the concept design that we included in this application. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I do have Nick here to answer a question specific to Sugar. Final designs for all project areas anticipated by the end of 2023 to support construction for 2024-2025. The project has secured ongoing technical support from both BPA and Bureau of Reclamation, and engaged stakeholders. It has engaged stakeholders and the regulatory agencies already in all aspects. The cost estimate that you see here, $7.4 million, is based on engineers' probable cost at 30%. It includes industry 30% contingency. We are looking to do a lot at this site. We are looking to place 44 wood structures. We're planting over 9 acres. Restore and protect 5.5 miles of off-channel and side-channel habitat, and increase flood activity over nearly 12 acres. Economically, projects like these have a huge boost to local economies. We've built a list of regional contractors, and we give preference to these local and regional contractors as award contracts. This project has rated into project areas. Our expectation is those project areas would be constructed coordinated, but with different contractors. We have found that if there are good ways to break a really large project up, that opens up the pool so that we can utilize local guys. And we really like to see the money come back into our community. Upper Columbus Salmon Recovery Board, a handful of years expected an economic analysis showed that funds spent on restoration projects cycle through our local communities 4 to 7 times. So if we look at the underlying cost of the project, we'd be looking at $30 to $50 million of money circulating through Eastern Washington economies. In order to meet the project's estimated cost, we're seeking funding from large cap, the full amount, and we have anticipated construction funding match from floodplain by design and BPA to make up the difference. With that, I'd like to use the remaining time to open that questions and discussion.
Thanks, Tara. Are there any questions? And I'll note ahead of time that we have just over 17.
Hey, Dave, this is Tree. Unfortunately, my little bar at the bottom, I have a little hand. And I'm not that's consistent with it, maybe because my go-to is desktop. But I do if no one else does.
Yeah, please do go ahead.
Okay. So my question is, I think in the upstream from the sugar, I think it's a 3R. There are a number of other areas that you guys are looking into. And are there any cold water area sugar reach that you're targeting?
Excuse me.
I was going to share, Brian, I know we have 5 different cold water or thermal anomalies in the reach. Are you aware where the other 2 are to the sugar reach?
I think one of them is one of the irrigation or irrigation return on in the 2 channels area. It is out of there, and I don't know where the offhand. I don't know where the 5th one is. There aren't. I don't think there are any known cold water thermal anomalies within the project area.
It is interesting to note, Tracy, that at the Chef site upstream of the Confluence Lewis, we have several groundwater supported perennial pools that are fed both by hill slope and groundwater. Part of this project development between 30 and 90 will be monitoring those perennial pool areas for temperature relative to the river, so we can inform how they're connected and how they disconnect, so we don't have this sparing issue. So we are going to be looking at each of the areas where we have these isolated pools, but aren't a lot. The WFW site, although we do have an optional pool area, we've already ruled out the thermal benefits. So it'll be at the sugar site where we're exploring further.
Yeah, thank you.
Great question.
And give others who had it say with the raising hand feature. Go ahead and just verbally have questions if anyone does have others.
Hi, this is Steve Fortney. I don't have a hand option, at least notice on my desktop version of it. Thanks for the presentation. It was informative, and I appreciate all the materials that were provided with the application. There's a lot of information contained in those materials, including some good information about the historic conditions at that site. So I just have a question about what your target conditions are in relation to the historic conditions in this reach. I have 2 different questions. One's related to channel changes, and one's related to the size of wood. So, and both are related, but I'm wondering what channel migration you're expecting to reach various places. I recognize that there are places where you're trying to reduce the amount of bank erosion, but in other places it might be beneficial to actually increase bank erosion. And I'm just wondering how those targeted conditions compare to historic conditions as far as what historic channel migration rates were. And then the other question is related to the amount of wood and the size of wood that's planting in this reach, and how that compares to size of the wood that you're planting in these structures is similar or different to the size of wood that used to be present in this reach. Thanks.
So I'll go ahead and start with the channel migration question. I don't have necessarily rates, although maybe I'll chime in a bit on that when I'm finished. But in terms of general, concepting and how there, unless we have a large event, migration rates are relatively slow. At the sugar site, we've got construction of a large anthropogenic feature, which is the levee, and including some recent of that levee feature with some riprap. And looking at aerial photos, for the most part of the beach, we don't see a ton of migration changes unless it's associated with a large flood event. And the sugar work site is unique in that after the placement levee, and the levee itself actually, they reoriented the river itself with the location of that levee. And that's submitted to that 90-degree turn. After that levee was placed, the historical photos shows a rapid migration of the river from the west to the east in that sugar last zone. So those channel paths we're looking to reactivate at seasonal former main stem channels in the last 50 years. Nick, do you have anything you would like to add in terms of historical conditions regarding migration rates and project intent going forward regarding that?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I can just have a few bits. We did do a reach scale analysis basically from Winthrop to Twist, looking broadly at migration rates, and indeed the reach is a little bit faster migration, and I think that's in part because of the levee and also because of some of the backwater effects from the Twist River. That being said, we don't have a target rate because, as you say, some places it's good, some places it's bad. But what I will say is, good versus bad are very binary terms, but you know what I mean. What I will say is this reach is definitely limited in space, and when you have a constrained reach, sometimes that migration is likely to be negative as opposed to good. The good is when it's forming habitat, bad is when it's having properties. And so one of the main objectives of this project, in particular with taking the end of that levee, is we're giving
Because I'm not.
that can make more healthy. Sorry, someone chime in the middle there.
Hey, Nick, I think we lost sound there for about 10 seconds. Could you just go back and restate that?
Yeah, did you tell what my question or something?
Yeah, your voice was still showing. Couldn't hear you.
Okay. My point was that by providing space to reach a river, we support the positive benefits of channel migration, and so while we don't have that target, really focused on providing as much space as we can. And then the piece I think was that this reach has been eroding more than sitting, and we think by providing space, we also support the process more set position and more natural balance in the reach.
And providing space is an important way, especially in that sugar area, is we have an ability to cover a lot of territory with that particular project. And, why it's always wishful that we go alley wall to alley wall. We can't. But we have, between equity, property acquisitions and conversations with landowners, opened up a huge component of that core and expanded the core beyond what is currently existing. And so the river will be able to function within that feasible river corridor. And that was a huge component of this project, is identifying, okay, what is the corridor that we can use?
Put that into an A2 firm on the left side of Sugar. We've added about 27 acres, and on the right side, we've added at least another 24 acres. So that gives the river a lot of room to move in what has been a really rapidly transition area since that 72 levy. Steve, the other question you asked, which I thought was really interesting, was on the size of the wood and scope of the wood. And if you've ever seen the historic pictures of the D8 cats moving down the river between the 48 flood and the 72 flood, put together with chains, stripping the wood out of the river, there was some big wood in this system that was removed as that flood control effort over the 30 years. A lot of that stuff, I don't think we would have the social tolerance to put it in the full spinning, free floating wood that was moving through the river prior to the 72. One of the things that Tara alluded to at the Eagle Rock site is we're looking at joining a cooperative construction with the Cool projects they scheduled for 24 to use helicopters to bring full-size wood for some of the bank complexity structures, as opposed to doing the typical pile-driven wood HIPAA compliant constructed structures. So we are trying to get in some of that larger wood that has greater niches or habitat. But because this is still a recreation and a built environment, that wood will be held in place. That wood will be bent, or it will be held by driven piles as opposed to being free floating. So we are trying to expand in some of the larger materials that previously have not been used in the main channel.
Yeah, and this I might also add. I think Tara mentioned the large pond of Pine Bay that tipped over. That is one of the inspirations for that. On the upstream end of the Eagle Rocks Reach, it was like a 30-inch diameter, 130, 100 plus foot long pine tree that tipped over into the river, and then spent the last I think it's been there like 4 or 5 years. And I think that a lot of trees that size were a much more common feature of the riverscape through here. But unfortunately, I don't think we have a source, and I think we get some pretty strong pushback for pushing over 30-inch trees.
Interesting that we made bets when that tree fell. The Tailwind got out there with the chainsaw and removed it, because that has been or practice valley is tree equals danger. And we found that tree there, I think that was in 17, and it's actually there's 3 trees there that are together. And when I've talked to a few of the rafters, the tolerance for structures and for trees has gone way up, and the tolerance for trees that are not interfering with uses of the river is also way up. So I think that the challenge for us that we're ready for is to be putting in trees in areas where people are expecting them and can tolerate them, because the way that we engage with the river and we engage with the public. So I don't think we could have put a 30-inch tree in 2007. I think we could put one in 2024.
Just a time check. There's a little bit 4 minutes remaining.
This is John. I've got a question. Tara, the proposed project has 4 work areas. In the middle of those 4 work areas, there's one that was excluded. Can you speak to why that was not included in the proposal, and would anything that is proposed with this effort preclude work in that 5th project area?
Just to clarify, John, are you referring to the confluence area that was part of the initial Sugar Reach, for the gap area between Eagle Rocks and WDFW.
Yeah, that gap area, I think you had it listed as the 2 channels project area.
Yep. So there's another recommendation is looking to pursue a project action area, and this wanted to respect to the that we've been doing. None of the actions that we're proposing will impact the action they are pursuing at that site.
It's a good. I think it's a good segue. There are a lot of restoration folks that are working in that valley, and the Salmon and the Yakimos work together in the location of the 18 side channel, which does take off from the center of this project area, and it comes back into the river opposite the left side. And our project is designed to support and work with the 90s projects. So that philosophy goes top to bottom on the project, to respect others' actions and to implement projects that complement or expand the benefits of those actions.
We are absolutely under 2 minutes remaining.
I'll take a moment, Dave, and just thank you for helping us facilitate the application in what you acknowledge was a short and exciting process. We appreciate the help with the SRFB and get the project forward.
In the comments, are there other questions for the MSRF team? Okay. Tara, Chris, Ryan, and all the folks at MSRF for putting this together. We will go ahead and transition to CNRD Natural Irrigation District Stream project. Mike, thanks for joining. I will hand over the reins to you.
Thanks, Dave. You may have to help me just get this up on screen. Oh, there you go. Easier than I thought. All right. Dave, are you seeing my presentation now?
I am, yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Dave, Citizen Committee, RTT members, others. Appreciate the opportunity to present today. I want to sort of build on what Chris was saying. This has been kind of a whirlwind effort but exciting, I think, to access some funds and get some significant work done. So, Dave, in particular, I want to thank you for rallying and organizing all of this on what is an extraordinarily short time frame. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Caputa. I'm the director of the Chelan County Natural Resources Department. We do a bunch of different things in our department. We have a habitat restoration program, and one thing you may not know about us is that we do a lot of work around water acquisitions, in-stream flows, and working with irrigation districts. And in particular, I mean, some of you have seen some earlier versions of some of the 2 projects we're going to present today. But a couple things just to kick it off. I mean, both of the presentations that we're giving today are water acquisitions. We've been working with both the Wenatchee Chihuahua Irrigation District and the Ice-Columbia Shaston Irrigation District on a whole series of improvements to their systems. And I'll go into some of those things in some details in both presentations. But because of the work that we've been doing with them and the work that they've been doing internally, they are both comfortable with considering just a straight up water acquisition. And it's a pretty exciting opportunity. We don't see a lot of these in the Wenatchee Basin. And we're just thrilled that we can be in a place where we can talk about water acquisitions, and we have irrigation districts who are willing to kind of make that kind of commitment for in-stream flow. So I'm going to start first with the Wenatchee Chihuahua Irrigation District in-stream flow improvement project. Here's a typical, let me hide something here. Here's a typical view of the canal. Let me orient you to where we are in the Wenatchee Basin. So Dave, are you seeing my my pointer?
I'm not.
Okay, let me go to this other screen. Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, so this is the Wenatchee Basin Water Resource Inventory Area 45. We have highlighted here the Wenatchee Chihuahua Irrigation District service area. Essentially serves the area around Plain near Lake Wenatchee, just north of Leavenworth. Let me give you a little background and detail on the irrigation district. So WCID stands for Wenatchee Chihuahua Irrigation District. So they have two diversions. One is on the Chihuahua River, and the other is on Clear Creek. And Clear Creek is the first tributary to the Chihuahua River as you go up the Chihuahua River. On the Chihuahua intake, they divert up to 33 CFS at their headworks, comes down the canal, gets to the fish screen, and they send up to a little over 18 CFS down the canal, and the remainder, so about 15 CFS, returns to the Chihuahua River right beyond the screen. The other diversion is on Clear Creek. They have a water right for 10 CFS. Flows in Clear Creek do not stay at 10 CFS throughout the irrigation season. And so we've been doing some stream flow monitoring in Clear Creek, and it looks like the low flow condition for Clear Creek is about 3 CFS. That's based on data from last year and this year. So it's a variable rate diversion, where they have a right for 10, but they can't always get that, particularly later in the year. The Clear Creek diversion is less sophisticated than the Chihuahua diversion, and it runs through a system of ponds at the Thousand Trails campground. And I'll walk you guys through that. I think some of you have been out there on site, and you might have that as a reference point for what that looks like. So just some orientation again, just to back up what I'm describing here. So up top, here's the 33 CFS diversion off of the Chihuahua River. So it goes into the canal. The canal runs roughly parallel to the Chihuahua River till it gets to Clear Creek. And then just below the ponds here's the Clear Creek weir and their diversion. And so they have water from Clear Creek that then goes into the canal at this point, and then the canal continues on into its service area. Just a couple of things to orient you to. So again, this is the Chihuahua River. Clear Creek is over here. And this is the Wenatchee River right here. So here's the confluence of the Chihuahua River and the Wenatchee River. Project goals. We want to complete a water acquisition with the Wenatchee Chihuahua Irrigation District to improve in-stream flows in the Chihuahua and Wenatchee rivers. Those are both Tier 1 ranked priority restoration reaches under the Upper Columbia prioritization strategy. Also want to address the low flow condition and the management impacts to Clear Creek. Clear Creek is not ranked under the prioritization strategy. The project includes decommissioning entirely the Clear Creek diversion. We're not asking for funding for the physical removal of the diversion, but we'll basically be retiring that Clear Creek water right within the WCID water rights portfolio. We're going to be building on past investments in Clear Creek. There's been a lot of investment in fish barriers and diversion removals, and I'll get into some detail on that. And then there is a larger Clear Creek restoration project that is ongoing that depends on the removal of the Clear Creek diversion. And then third, for the irrigation district, their board is very interested in improving their efficiency and their delivery system. We've been meeting with them for close to 10 years, working through different options, and they are ready to move forward with some projects. So first, just wanted to orient you to the area where we're working in relation to the priority reaches in the prioritization strategy. So just to orient you again, here's Lake Wenatchee off to the left. Nason Creek comes into the Wenatchee River. Wenatchee River flows east, and that's where the Chihuahua River comes in. So our project is exactly located in the Tier 1 reach ranks for Chihuahua River Lower 02, Chihuahua River Lower 01, and then the Wenatchee River Beaver reaches 9, 8, 7, 6, and 5. And so those are all Tier 1 reaches, and they all have an unacceptable limiting factor of summer base flow. Here's Clear Creek, not ranked. The removal of the diversion there would benefit Clear Creek 01. So just pointing out that our project aligns really, frankly, perfectly with the reach restoration ranks and with addressing the primary limiting factor of summer base flow. So a couple details on that. So on the Chihuahua River, from river mile 2.9, so at the diversion down to the Wenatchee River, there would be a 5 CFS improvement. So we would reduce the irrigation district diversion by 5 CFS. On Clear Creek, there would be a removal of the irrigation district diversion on Clear Creek at river mile 0.5. So this is the variable part, right? So there's 2 CFS, 2 out of the 3 CFS during low flow that goes into the canal. And so that's the area, that's the piece that we are focusing on for our application. Prior to flows dropping off in Clear Creek, but during the irrigation season, they can and do divert up to 10 CFS. And because of the sort of lack of sophistication at the diversion point, they've had more than 10 CFS go into Clear Creek. And I'll walk through why that's the case. So if you add those two up, the 5 CFS and the 2 CFS during low flow, then we would be benefiting the Wenatchee River, for about 7 miles at 7 CFS. So again, we're working in a Tier 1, rank 1 area for summer base flow. There's also some concerns about temperature, and we'll be assisting with that as well. So I have a graphic here to walk us through this, and I think Dave, I'd like to spend a little time here and make sure that what we're describing is registering with everybody. And so I may pause here after I walk through this and see if there's any questions about this graphic. So starting up here on the Chihuahua River, you know, the typical low flow is about 70 CFS. And so we picked that for this graphic. We've seen flows in the Chihuahua during low flow periods drop below 70 CFS. But for discussion purposes today, that's the number that we picked. At the Chihuahua diversion, right? So they do divert the 33 CFS to get into their headworks, but there's a return flow there, right? So we're just counting right now the 18 CFS right here that they pull out of the Chihuahua that goes down the canal, right? So you have 70 CFS, they pull out 18 pre-project, right? That leaves 52 CFS, right? So then that water flows down here till you get to the confluence with Clear Creek, right? And so the Clear Creek low flow we picked was 3 CFS. And again, that's based on data collection from last year and this year. If they're diverting, 2 CFS, right, then that leaves 1 CFS in Clear Creek. Post project, you know, we're gonna buy that 2 CFS, so then there's going to be 3 CFS coming out of Clear Creek. You have 57 CFS then after the project coming down for a total of 60 CFS. This benefit continues down then through the Wenatchee River through those other reaches. So Dave, let me pause here because this is kind of the crux of the work that we're trying to do here with the irrigation district and entertain some questions.
Yeah, certainly. Looks like John Arterburn did raise his hand. Go ahead, John.
Mike, really appreciate the diagram. It's hard to totally understand some of these projects and lots of numbers get thrown around. So I really appreciate your efforts to make a very clear and concise diagram. So even the weakest of us all can understand, you know, exactly what we get, where and how. I do have a question on the how part of that, though. I totally understand how you get your numbers that you're deriving for Clear Creek because you're removing the diversion infrastructure. There will be no capacity to be able to divert the water. Therefore, it's ensured whatever comes down Clear Creek remains in stream and goes downriver. So I'm really happy with that. That's easy to follow. I totally get it. I have less understanding for how the control mechanism is worked at the Chihuahua diversion. I'm not familiar with the diversion. And how are you certain that you will only be diverting 13 and you won't accidentally get 18?
Yes, John, thank you for that question. And I have some subsequent slides that get exactly to how the district diverts water off the Chihuahua, and post-project how we will implement compliance monitoring to ensure that we're hitting the flows that we are committing to. And so if I could just set that question aside, I will answer it directly in about 7 minutes.
I'm happy to wait. Thanks.
Thanks.
John,
So Mike, this is
Tracy.
Tracy. Oh, sorry.
I've got a quick question. And one, thanks, Mike, for this. Like John said, it's super helpful. The diagram here. So I got 2 questions. One is kind of along the lines of John's question on that Chihuahua diversion. They have a water right for 33, and I'm assuming you'll get to this, but they've got a water right for 33, but they're only diverting 18, which is leaving 15 CFS up in the air. And has there been a discussion about them abandoning that 15 CFS to keep in stream? So that's kind of a question on how that diversion, it just seems like an insane amount of water to be putting down a fish return of 15 CFS. So I'm curious what that looks like. And then my next question is for both the lower Chihuahua reaches and then in the main stem Wenatchee, with these flow increases, so that would be, I guess, 7 CFS in Chihuahua 1 and 5 CFS in Chihuahua 2 and 7 CFS in the Wenatchee. What is the corresponding shift, rather just in terms of CFS? What's the change in stage? And do these flows equate to a measurable increase in river stage, thus habitat for fish?
Yeah. John, I can answer your first question right now, and I will partially answer your second question in a little bit. For the Chihuahua diversion, they have a fish screen there, and the fish screen limits the amount of water that can go into the canal. So they divert 33 at the headworks, comes down the canal, hits the fish screen at 80%, 85% submergence, and I'll show you a photo of the screen here in a second. They can get 18.1 CFS. It's possible that they could get that up to 19, but then you're running the risk then of overtopping this barrel drum screen, right? The water just basically goes over the top, right? It's so high. And so that's the limiter on how much water goes into the canal. I'll show you a photo.
But where, like, if they have a right for 33 and they're not using 33, how, I guess I'm missing out on that 15 CFS. Where does that go? Like, if you're diverting 33 to get 18, what happens to that 15? Is that being consumptively used or just diverted and put right back on a non-consumptive use that could be acquired for in-stream purposes? I guess I'm confused a little bit.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. The way the irrigation district describes it is that there's 18 CFS that they put to beneficial use that goes into the canal. The 15 CFS, the difference there that returns to the creek are management flows, right? That you need that much water to get down to the screen, but then only 18 goes through the screen and the other 15 then returns to Chihuahua right at that, right below. There's a return flow pipe. It's very similar to the Icicle Irrigation District diversion, where they send 117 CFS down the canal, but they probably pull 130, 140, and then 117 actually goes down the canal. Same with Wenatchee Reclamation District. Here, the PUD actually delivers them. I think they pull over 200 CFS, but they have to deliver to the Wenatchee Reclamation District 200 CFS. So it's pretty common with the irrigation districts in the Wenatchee Basin that there is a return flow that is not counted as part of the beneficial use that actually goes into the canal.
Got it. Thanks.
Tracy Hillman, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, so Mike, I echo what the others have said about the figure. I think it's very useful. However, it's not shown on your slide there, but in the application, downstream in the Wenatchee River, it shows an arrow that says end of trust reach.
Yes.
And does that mean that the 7 CFS that would be purchased would be protected down to that part, and then that flow that goes further down the Wenatchee can then be used by somebody else? Or is this water permanently protected throughout the entire Wenatchee Basin?
Yeah, so good question, Tracy. So the outcome here that we're looking for is that the water would be permanently protected. Technically speaking, the end of the trust reach is where the irrigation district canal ends. Because we're doing a water acquisition, like we're buying this water, it's going to be protected down to the Columbia River.
Nice, thanks.
But along those lines, then, if it's protected, how does that affect different water right calls that are made downstream at that point? Wouldn't it allow those diversions to go longer into a season, or are they just subtracted throughout?
Yeah, so when we do the report of examination, and I have a slide on this in a little bit, but when we do that report of examination, that's with the Department of Ecology. So they will be alerted that there's a water acquisition. It's part of their evaluation, and they will have to incorporate that into the notices that they send to what we call the interruptibles in the Wenatchee River, right? So I think your question is, right now, and it actually just happened last week, there's 44 interruptible water rights on the main stem Wenatchee that at a certain flow, they get the call and they're cut off. And so that number then would need to change for when they get that phone call.
That's exactly it. Yeah. So everybody's call would come at a 7 CFS higher.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. As long as that was in there. Yeah. I think I echo Tracy's thing, just making sure that you're protecting this water here, that it makes it down to the Columbia, I think is what everybody's thinking about. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. This is an environmental benefit project. So yes, that's. I appreciate the positive feedback on the graphics. It felt a little bit like I think Tracy, I had actually talked to you about this several months ago, but it felt a little bit like an algebra problem with the train A leaving the station and train B leaving the station, just to think through how this works. What seemed simple actually took a little bit of work to get through. So I'm glad that we hit the mark here. Are there any other questions about this graphic? Great. We have taken a deep dive into some of the climate science and the flow projections that have been coming out, and undoubtedly some of you have seen some of this work too. The Icicle work group contracted with the University of Washington Climate Impacts Group, and we did some stream flow projections for Icicle Creek, Peshastin Creek, and Mission Creek. And then just recently, like in the last couple months, Ecology's Office of the Columbia River came out with the Columbia Basin long-term water supply forecast, which also includes an in-stream flow projection. And there's actually, if you're interested, and it's interesting information, there's a watershed by watershed evaluation of both water supply and flow modeling. And so looking at some of the Icicle modeling that we did and looking at that long-term water supply forecast, the models are predicting a pretty significant decrease in Chihuahua River base flow by 2040, and a pretty significant increase in the Chihuahua River temps. And again, some of this was extrapolated from the impacts in Icicle, but they're fairly similar systems. We worked through some of this with Guillaume at the UW Climate Impacts Group. The other thing that we're seeing is that the peak runoff is expected to occur over 3 weeks earlier. And this is all, these predictions are within our lifetime, right? And so that low flow period, we're using that 70 CFS, but it could be substantially reduced, in short order. And we, one of the obvious benefits that we see of this project is that, we're trying to fight that off, right? And, improving in-stream flow in an era where we know it's going to decrease just seems to really hit the mark. So we didn't get to do a tour, but here's the virtual tour, part of the presentation. And I think this gets to a couple of questions earlier. So this is the Wenatchee Chihuahua Irrigation District diversion on Chihuahua River. So they have this screen. So there's 33 CFS comes into the screen apparatus. 18 of that will go beyond. You see my you see my pointer. 18 CFS will go down into the canal. The return flow pipe is located over here. I have a photo of that. Here's looking from the opposite direction. So this is the water that's then leaving and going down into the canal. Here's the return flow pipe. And what they do over the season is they keep extending this pipe, right? This was back in the spring when flows were pretty high. But the flows drop so low that they extend this probably another 20 feet, right? So that the fish that are returning don't get thrown out on just sort of bare cobble. I've walked about 8 miles of the canal. This is an area that's just above plain. Up on, you've probably seen some of that sandstone up there. These guys who built this canal just kind of put the canal, carved it into the sandstone, poured this concrete wall. It's a long way down from here. This is not an OSHA approved tour photo. And it's just kind of hanging on there. As the canal runs through different portions of the system, there's lots of vegetation around the canal, lots of trees. They had a big windstorm a few years ago, and there's varying levels of flow in the canal depending on where you are in the system. There's a pretty significant tunnel that is carved through that sandstone. And this is literally the light at the end of the tunnel. It's about a quarter mile, not quite a quarter mile down to walk through the tunnel and get to the other side. So I want to spend a little time talking about the irrigation district diversion on Clear Creek. And, we've had some presentations to you before on Clear Creek. We've had some surfboard funding and some BPA funding to implement a restoration project here, and I'm going to describe that as well. So let me orient you to the Clear Creek diversion. Like I said, it's less sophisticated than the Chihuahua diversion. So in the upper right-hand corner, here's Clear Creek coming in. It goes underneath the county road. And so that bridge was installed, I think, about 7 or 8 years ago. And then it goes into the upper pond. At this location, that's where the Chihuahua Irrigation District has a couple of weirs here, and they can manage flows to go in either into the upper pond or what we call the auxiliary channel. And so they do this as a way to manipulate pond levels. And the upper pond goes down into the lower pond, and here's the spillway. I'll show you a photo of the spillway. Hey, Dave, I'm getting a little feedback from I think a new participant.
Yeah, thanks. I can't quite tell who that is. Is there a caller number that someone sees that's coming from?
Are you guys? Hello?
If someone just joined, would you please mute? And Mike, for a time check, you have about 30 minutes remaining.
Yeah, great. So on Clear Creek, then, the water, can be split and is often split right up here before it goes into the upper pond. If y'all have been out to the upper pond, it's largely silted in. I have some information on these ponds. But then Clear Creek leaves this lower pond in 2 ways. There's a spillway, right? So then the spillway dumps into the irrigation district canal. So here's the canal in yellow. This red here, this is the historic alignment, pre-pond of Clear Creek. And some water goes over into kind of the new Clear Creek as of the 1950s, which is essentially a ditch. It's all the way down that field, parallel to the road, crosses under a flume in the canal system, and then goes down into the Chihuahua River. A couple slides on the history of this, and then I'll get into some detail on what's going on there. This is an old right. It was established pre-water code in 1912, and it's been used continually since then. It is what we call a variable rate water right, because the water right is for 10 CFS, but as I indicated earlier, there's only 3 CFS in late season, so they can't access all of it late season. The Department of Ecology approved an amendment in 2019 that added this non-additive component of Clear Creek to their Chihuahua portfolio, which means that it's basically a second point of diversion. If you do a reduction on Clear Creek, you have to do a reduction on the Chihuahua River, but the reverse is not the case. You can do a reduction on the Chihuahua River and leave Clear Creek in place. And so that has some implications for the restoration project that I'll talk about here in a second. So the ponds were built in the 1950s, and there are still some folks who live up there who remember when they were built, and that included the dam across the creek and that auxiliary channel that I described. So then the Clear Creek Canal and that diversion was incorporated into those ponds. And I'll show you some of the infrastructure there. And this continues to this day. They manage this diversion through a system of flashboards and sandbags. And let me show you some photos of that. So at the upper end, so this is just below the Chihuahua Loop Road, there are actually 2 small weirs. One of them is more obvious than the other. This one on the right is more obvious. It's the second one. But the first one is where you can, the irrigation district can initially divert flows. And then the second one is another opportunity for them to divert flows. And so both of these both of these weirs effectively are opportunities then for the irrigation district to send flows either into the pond system or into the auxiliary channel. At the other end of the ponds, at the lower pond, the larger of the 2, this is where the concrete spillway is incorporated into the road. So it's a gravel road that you can drive on to go around the ponds. There's a concrete area there, and then there's water so in the manipulation of the ponds, this then sends water over that spillway. You can see on the second photo down the embankment and eventually down into the canal. Yeah, so back in July, we were out there walking with them, and that's what you see. Again, there's a manipulation of the pond levels, and water flows over this spillway down into the canal. Just showing you here that we've been measuring flows there to establish, that there is actually 3 CFS in Clear Creek during low flow periods, and then measuring the flow that's been going over the spillway. So this year, we installed all this equipment, and on that previous map, it had the locations of different flow and temperature loggers. The irrigation district agreed to do no manipulation of the pond system. And that was to allow us to get just basic data on what water's coming in and where's it going without any human interference. And so we're still processing that. That's all that information is being collected and funded. It's being funded by our agreement with BPA as part of the restoration project. There's one further complication in Clear Creek between the two ponds. The upper pond is filling in. It's pretty hot in the late summer, but there's also some pretty interesting concrete features in between those two ponds, and we think they could be fish barriers at certain flows. And so somebody built some kind of aesthetic waterfall feature between the ponds that's kind of buried underneath these trees. You can see it really well in some locations and not so well in others, but we think that's an issue that needs to be addressed as well. So the big thing, trying to get to the punchline here about what's going on in Clear Creek is that through the manipulation of flows into the ponds and into the auxiliary channel, what we see is some pretty significant changes in dewatering in both the Clear Creek outlet from the lower pond and the auxiliary channel, right? So you remember I pointed out the auxiliary channel in the diagram. This is the auxiliary channel here. This is the outlet for Clear Creek, where water is coming out of the lower pond, and the irrigation district spillway is right over here. So what we see is that there's been sort of varying levels of riparian vegetation in these areas. You can see the difference here, 2015 and 2017. But what we're also seeing is that, here's the auxiliary channel. We're not seeing any water there in May of 2015, July 2017, but then over here, in the upper auxiliary channel up by those basketball courts, so this is closer to where they manage those flows, there is flow there, and there's some vegetation there that's supported by the flow. And we saw that this year. We saw a flow going into the auxiliary channel, but then in other years, it's just dry as a bone. And so this sort of random manipulation of these ponds is having a pretty significant impact on fish. And so we have some data from some surveys, steelhead red surveys that the Department of Fish and Wildlife had done. And just to orient you here, here are the two ponds, right? Here's the upper pond, here's the lower pond. Well, these are all steelhead reds, and they're in all kinds of locations, right? I mean, you can see them in that, effectively that ditch that is Clear Creek as it leaves the pond. But you can also see sort of in the auxiliary channel, there's also been some spawning. And we're trying to figure out if this is a barrier or not too, right? Because we're not seeing many fish go up past here. This is the location of the Trout Unlimited project to remove the Thousand Trails domestic water system, surface water diversion with a dam. And we're not sure if that was the entirety of the barrier for steelhead going up Clear Creek. Let me show you one more slide on just what we're seeing in terms of reds. So this was 2009 to 2011. This one out here is clearly an error. We don't have any more current information on this. I don't believe WDFW was collecting any more information. But that's the situation at the ponds. Let me cover one more slide, then I could entertain some questions, I think, on Clear Creek there. There's been a fair amount of investment in Clear Creek. We, the county, had some surfboard and BPA funds to replace 3 upstream culverts, so upstream of the area that we're looking at here on Forest Service. We built some bridges up there. Thousand Trails project that TU sponsored, had surfboard, BPA, and tributary committee funding to remove that surface water diversion dam. And then various folks have implemented riparian plantings in kind of random locations out there as well. Let me cover my Clear Creek upcoming restoration opportunities, and then I'll circle back on Clear Creek. So we have a restoration project going on in Clear Creek that is funded by BPA, the county, Yakima Nation Coho program, Upper Columbia Irrigation District, Thousand Trails, et cetera, are participating in that. This is just the existing conditions overview, right? So we've been taking a look at this upper pond, the lower pond, the auxiliary channel. What can we do here, right? What can we do to make this better habitat? And so we have some ideas that are evolving. I believe we're trying to get on the RTT schedule for November to talk through some of these options with you. I will say, I believe in all scenarios, we are relying on the removal of the Chihuahua Irrigation District Clear Creek diversion, right? Because we cannot implement restoration and depend on flows if there's going to be this somewhat random or erratic flow manipulation by the irrigation district. So we're looking at some pretty interesting things that we're excited to present to the RTT. This one up here in the upper right-hand corner, potentially just turning that upper pond into creating some sinuosity there and making a creek there where the pond is filling in. Maybe having a channel that comes off of the upper pond. But again, it all kind of relies on the removal of the weir, right? We've identified the weir here on the diagrams. The design team has been gravitating towards some preferred alternatives that we're going to tee up for the RTT. Again, on the left, looking at the lower pond outlet and trying to improve that ditch that is Clear Creek now, and then kind of pulling it all together, improving the upper pond, the lower pond, and the flow management. So one more slide on Clear Creek, and then I'll zoom back out and address the entire project. So a couple things, and I think this came up in the August preview that Dan Haller presented. Two important points. The Clear Creek diversion is incompatible with restoration efforts. It just doesn't work. And then the second point, I think this came up specifically, is that the Corey campus with the Yakima Nation Coho program is on the design team, and the restoration options that we're developing are compatible with the coho acclimation. So the Yakima Nation has plans to use that lower pond as a coho acclimation facility. And so Corey's been informing that design effort. And one other thing that we've been talking with the irrigation district, if they cannot move forward with a project, their options are they could continue to manage it as is. They have also discussed potentially installing a valve at that spillway that would help them more accurately regulate the diversion. So we'd have more certainty from the irrigation district if they were to do that. It may be less desirable, though, from a restoration perspective. Okay, so I went pretty far into the Clear Creek piece because I really wanted to show sort of what the implications are of this water acquisition for the future Clear Creek restoration piece. But I want to step back and kind of go back to the graphic of what we're trying to do here in terms of the water acquisition, trying to reduce the flow, or trying to reduce the diversion and improve the flow on the Chihuahua, doing the same thing on Clear Creek. Let me pause there, and maybe we could have some questions if there are any about this Clear Creek component. I know I covered a lot there, and I intentionally wanted to have some questions now.
And a quick time check, we have about 13 minutes left.
Great.
I got a question, Mike, on steelhead. In terms of like current use, you were talking, and maybe I missed it, so apologies if I did, but you were talking about, you showed some red locations, and you said it was, I think, 2009 to 2011 for steelhead, which 2000, but all the dots were the same color. So I couldn't tell what year it is. And 2010 was like a massive return of steelhead to the upper Columbia. So I'm wondering, have there been any recent steelhead surveys in there, and what have they shown, like in the last 5 years or something like that? So I'm just curious what it's looked like in terms of numbers of steelhead returning to Clear Creek in years that returns aren't super robust overall.
Yeah, John, great question. I had 2 slides there. One was it was a compilation of the 2006 to 2013 red survey, and then the second slide, and all of those reds were different colors according to year. The next one was 2009 to 2011, and I'm not sure why that is, why they're the same color on that 09 to 11, and I have not been able to find any additional information. We had our staff look for other information. I would maybe phone a friend here and ask if anybody on the RTT would have any more recent information about steelhead.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I don't know much about it, but yeah, I know 2010 was a massive run.
Yeah, I can maybe address that. I think a few years ago, monitoring of steelhead escapement is based on a mark recapture, a patch occupancy model. And so they are not doing steelhead surveys or red surveys in many of the tributaries anymore. They only do them in the main stem, Wenatchee, and the very lower portions of, I think, the Chihuahua, Peshastin Creek, Nason Creek, and places like that. So they have pit tag arrays in there, and they're using a model to estimate spawning escapement. So we really don't know as much about the distribution of fish in those tributaries as we did before. And I think the data that Mike presented were current, based on when spawning surveys were conducted. But now that spawning surveys are not conducted in those tributaries, we do not have those kind of data.
So are we working under the assumption that, so Tracy, is there a pit tag array on Clear Creek now? And what has that, I mean, do we still have fish going into Clear Creek? I guess that's a basic question.
Yeah, I don't know that we can answer that. I think the pit tag array is down by the hatchery, the acclimation area, the Chihuahua acclimation area, which is downstream, I believe, of Clear Creek. So the pit tag array is detecting fish there, and they only do red surveys downstream from the pit tag array. So everything upstream from there is not, they're still estimating spawning escapement. They just can't tell you precisely where all those fish are spawning. My gut tells me that they're still probably spawning in Clear Creek, but I don't know that for sure.
Was there, following up on that being a hatchery, was there any wild escapement into Clear Creek, or were those just all hatchery fish coming back to a proximate location to the hatchery? Is there any idea what we were dealing
I would
with?
have to look that up. I think it was a combination of hatchery and wild fish going in there. It's too bad Jeremy or Catherine aren't with us, but yeah, I think it was probably both.
Thank you.
Tracy, did you have, yeah, thank you for the question. And Tracy, thanks for helping out there. Tracy, when we presented the Clear Creek idea to the RTT during the surfboard process, I think it was in 2020. That's when BPA picked up the funding for it. I seem to recall you had some field observations of spring Chinook use in lower Clear Creek. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. When we were doing our surveys, we always found spring Chinook and Omicus in Clear Creek. We even found juvenile spring Chinook up in, up on the bench up there, and it's not quite into the auxiliary channel, but that one channel that kind of flows around there.
Okay.
Not many Chinook in there. There were juvenile steelhead in there or Omicus, but yeah, most of the juvenile Chinook are in the very lower section. It's a pretty good, that's a pretty good gradient in that lower portion. It climbs up the hill there rapidly, and so most of the Chinook are downstream near the mouth of that stream.
Great, thank
So,
you.
Mike, I do have one question, and I think this kind of piggybacks on what both maybe the two Johns were referring to. So that it sounds like they have a water right of 33 CFS, right, at the Chihuahua?
Yeah, that's what they, right.
Yeah, and if you purchase a 5 CFS, what is to prevent them from saying, okay, well, that reduced our water right down to 28 CFS. We're still going to divert, we're only going to divert 28 CFS now at River Mile 3.6, and we'll keep our canal at 18 CFS. Is there anything in this agreement that is actually saying it's the amount of flow going down the canal that is going to be reduced? Or will they just, you know, you did a good job of talking about climate change and its effect on temperature and flows. Well, flows really drop and they realize that they're hurting for water. Why couldn't they come back and say, well, our water right now is 28 CFS, so we're going to use as much of that as we can?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Tracy, because there, and I'm sorry if there's any confusion about this, because there shouldn't be. The 18 CFS that leaves the screen that goes into the canal is the part of their diversion that has been put to beneficial use. And so we are buying 5 CFS. So the maximum that they can send down the canal and put to beneficial use is 13 CFS. It's not 33, it's not 28, it's 13. They will probably still need to divert 33 at the headworks to get to the screen, right? Because the screen is designed, you know, to accommodate a certain amount of flow and a flow velocity and the cleaning. But that's just an engineering function. For water purposes, the amount of water that goes into the canal is going to be reduced from 18 to 13.
Okay, that's super helpful. And how will that be monitored? Will they have a remote gauge, or will you guys have to go out there and measure it on occasion?
So let me do this, because I have some information on that. Dave, I want to do a time check here. I have, because we have 2 water acquisitions, right? I have the Icicle and Peshastin coming up. I have identical slides on these topics about compliance monitoring, the water acquisition, and I'm wondering if I could go a little over now and cover all of that now, and then I won't have to duplicate it in the second presentation.
Yeah, Mike, right now you have 5 minutes remaining in this presentation. How much over were you planning for, or do you anticipate?
I think 5 minutes.
Okay, I think that's okay, and then we can just extend our, basically we'll plan for that though to come out of your next presentation. So plan for 55 minutes for Icicle Peshastin.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so a couple things I want to hit on to wrap this up. First, in terms of like overall magnitude of flow impacts that we're seeing in the Upper Wenatchee and the Chihuahua, again, I mean the low summer base flows identified as a primary limiting factor, an unacceptable condition. We see really 3 opportunities, just kind of looking forward on flow improvements. First is this current project, reducing the diversion by 5 CFS on the Chihuahua, reducing the diversion on Clear Creek. That's really phase 1. We think, in working with the irrigation district for the last 10 years now, that we can probably get them down to 9 in a phase 2 project. And so that's something that they're thinking about. They need to do this first bit of work first, but there's a future opportunity here as well. And so that would address most of the in-stream flow impact, because this is the major diverter in this area. The third phase, which I think is an ongoing phase, and you guys are starting to see some of these types of projects, are through BDAs and alluvial water storage. I think one of the important things we're going to want to talk about is, what is the actual flow improvement and what's the timing of that flow improvement with BDAs and alluvial water storage. But we think addressing this primary limiting factor of in-stream flows is pretty much captured with these efforts that I've listed. I want to talk a little bit about the cost estimate and how we plan on paying for this. Historically in the Wenatchee Basin, cost estimates have ranged from $2,000 to $3,000 per acre foot. Although the county, that's historic. That's probably up to about 3 or 4 years ago. More recently, not in the Wenatchee, but in Lake Chelan, the county, we actually purchased some water, 73 acre feet in Lake Chelan at $5,000 an acre foot. There have been some confidential valuations in the Wenatchee Basin that we've been party to. Some special circumstances in the Wenatchee Basin, we've seen values as high as $20,000 an acre foot. If you want to nerd out on how you convert acre feet to CFS and include the cost range, I've got the formula down here. But basically for the Wenatchee Chihuahua Irrigation District, if we were to buy 7 CFS, multiply it by the number of days, 150 days is the irrigation season, the converter for acre feet to CFS times $2,750 an acre foot. We think that's a little on the low side of things, but we think it's in the ballpark. Get to about $5.7 million. So how are we going to pay for this? So the county, and Dave, these are the slides that I'm replicating and won't need to cover in the next presentation. So the county participates in the Columbia Basin Water Transactions program. And we've had a couple sponsors locally who have participated in this program for a long time. Trout Unlimited and the Washington Water Trust. So all 3 of us, TU, WWT, and the county are now QLEs. We're qualified local entities. We get paid. We have a contract with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to develop water acquisitions for in-stream flow purposes. And in addition to getting funding to support that work, we also have the opportunity to submit in-stream flow acquisition proposals to the Columbia Basin program. That funding comes from BPA. So I've been talking with the regional director in California, Femke Freiberg, and they're very interested in this project and in the next project. We will submit a funding request for part of the acquisition to the Columbia Basin Water Transactions program. In terms of how this works, there's multiple steps that we have to go through. You may have a question about back here on how did we come up with these numbers and how confident are we in the numbers? We're very confident in the numbers and the range of values. So one of the first steps that has to happen is there has to be a final valuation. We've completed a preliminary draft. We're still reviewing that to determine the value of water here. One important distinction between sort of water valuation and land appraisals is that when you do a land appraisal, you generally speaking get a number. For water valuations, you get a range, and that range and the ultimate number that you pick is negotiated between the funders and the seller. And so it is very common to see that range. I included the Wenatchee Basin report from the Columbia Basin Water Transactions program in the surfboard attachments, and you'll see that they talk quite a bit about range of value there. So we feel pretty good about the numbers that we're looking at, but there will be a final evaluation on that. And then it has to go through the report of examination with the Department of Ecology. So that establishes, that the right has been, irrigating a certain number of acres, a certain CFS. That will capture the information that I was just talking about with you in terms of reducing, the 18 to the 13, where the beneficial reach is through the Wenatchee River. All of that stuff comes out in the report of examination. There's an ROE that's coming out here soon on the Cascade Orchard Irrigation Company. And if you're on that listserv, you'll see all of that information. There's a purchase and sale agreement, and then we transfer it to the state trust water program. There are guidelines from RCO that are consistent with the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program on how this works. There is an intentional effort with those two entities to align their water acquisition guidelines and policies. And then finally, to the compliance monitoring piece, there's a couple ways this occurs. This will be identified in the report of examination. Because the county is a qualified local entity, we will be required through the acquisition to implement compliance monitoring. The irrigation district will also be required to report their diversions to make sure that they comply with the goals that were established in the purchase and sale agreement. So there's 2 or 3 kind of safety nets there, including the Department of Ecology, to ensure that, one, for the Chihuahua, that they're reducing their diversion that's going into the canal. Also, the other is a little easier for compliance purposes, is to ensure that they don't rebuild the Clear Creek diversion, that's actually decommissioned. Some benefits of a water acquisition. It's fairly straightforward. If you can get to a point where an irrigation district is interested and willing to entertain a water acquisition, then for environmental purposes, we get the water and it's dedicated to in-stream flow. You don't have to go through years of sort of engineering and design and construction. And just looking at the costs right now, we had Dave Rice, do an evaluation of, trying to, install pipes, in both the Wenatchee, Chihuahua and Icicle, Peshastin in open canals. And the costs of that and the benefits you would get far exceed the costs of the water acquisition. So we're in an era where water acquisition is much more cost effective than trying to do a physical infrastructure project on its own, going through that public bid process and paying prevailing wage. There was a question.
Mike, there is
go ahead.
Less than 1 minute remaining after that added 5 minutes. So if there are any last second questions, keep that in mind.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think you guys saw this slide before, project comparables. These are the MVID, COIC, and Pioneer. These were projects. They're in the ballpark. Probably these projects could have been done for, if you had just done a straight up acquisition, it would be interesting, I think, to see what the costs would have been rather than do sort of the physical construction of it. But it's hard. It's hard to get to the point where folks are comfortable with the water acquisition. So Dave, those last 6 or 7 slides, I won't need to cover those in the next presentation. Why don't I pause here, see if there's any last questions there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
I got one, Mike.
Oh.
So with the reduction in flow, how is the canal company, how are they how does that change operations? Like, you're not doing efficiencies with it, so is land being fallowed, and what would happen with those lands? So what's the fallout of the reduction? What's that look like?
Yeah, so they will be doing strategic canal improvements, right? I mean, where we started with was, could we build them 4 miles of pipe, right, to replace the upper 4 miles of canal, at least just looking in that first section. And they don't need to do that necessarily like all at once in order to reach the management flows they want to achieve. But they know, because we've done the seepage loss analysis work with them, we know where they're losing water. And so they can strategically address those areas where they're losing water. And so they're, they have a plan and a strategy on how to do that. And the nice thing for us is that, we'll probably help them with some of that work. But, from an environmental perspective, we don't have to worry about that, right? Because they're committed to the 13 CFS.
Okay, and I do want to be mindful of time here. Kate Terrell, I did see that you had your hand raised. Kate, do you want to go ahead and ask your question, and we'll wrap up and we'll take a shorter break than planned. And Mike, I do want to point out that we'll carve out this extra time from your next presentation.
Yeah, the next one is going to be much shorter.
Okay.
Go ahead, I just want to, I would just ask for a point of clarification. In your proposal, you were looking at water savings from July through September, which is 90 days, but in your cost estimate, you have 150 days. Can you clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, I sure can. So the Chihuahua benefit is going to be 5 CFS for 150 days. The Clear Creek benefit is going to be basically the maximum they can divert during low flow periods. So that's the 2 CFS. What we are trying to figure out, and I think I was trying to figure out, Kate, how to fill this in and describe this in the application, is that there is an earlier season diversion that is higher than 2 CFS, right? And so how much is that? Because they can divert up to 10, and how much is that worth? And I mean, for salmon recovery purposes, we thought that the 2 CFS is what we would be interested in. We are going to talk to the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program about how they want to value and acquire the non-low flow water. That's the variable rate. It's like Peshastin, where they have a diversion of 48 CFS, but they can only get 17, right, at low flow. And I'll talk about that in the next presentation.
One more question, Mike, is getting back to one I asked earlier about river stage on this. Will these changes, say in the main stem Wenatchee, result in a observable change in river stage?
Yeah.
So you get more floodplain or anything like that?
Yeah, they will, John. I don't have those. I don't have those graphics in the presentation. I believe they're in the surfboard application. I will confirm that and make sure that you guys get that.
Thanks. Yeah, again, it's stage, not flow.
Yes. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, we looked at that. So I'll get that information.
Okay, well, thanks, Mike. Let's break for 5 minutes. We'll reconvene at 21 after, and then we'll get going with the Icicle Peshastin project. And Mike, we'll just plan to put 50 minutes on the clock for that next project as we went 10 minutes over for this one. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Hey, Dave, how long is the break?
5 minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Excited to be proposing a second water acquisition. This one with the Icicle and Peshastin irrigation districts. It's a straight up sale of water that would follow the process that I outlined in the previous presentation. You are looking at a photo of Icicle Creek. So this is in the Hatchery Reach. The Hatchery Reach is the historic channel, and this is the area that is really the emphasis for the icicle work group and the icicle strategy to improve in-stream flows in this reach. This photo was taken in, this was last year in 2021. You can see some conduit that's running across the creek that provides, we think, power. It's also possible that there's city water here that goes up and serves some of those homes where Harriet Bullitt used to live. So IPID stands for Icicle and Peshastin Irrigation Districts. They have two major diversion points. There's one on Peshastin Creek and the other one on Icicle Creek. They have one other one that I'll mention when we get to the map. On Peshastin Creek, they divert up to 48 CFS at their intake into the canal. Similar to the Clear Creek conversation we were having during low flow, they can't get all of that 48. There may be something on the order of 20 CFS, which is 20 CFS or lower is a typical flow that we see in Peshastin Creek. And the irrigation district will divert all of that except for 3 CFS that they reserve for the fish ladder that we actually built with them years ago. So that's just another example of what we call the variable rate diversion, where you have a water right that exceeds during some times of the irrigation season the amount of flow that's actually in the creek. These systems are tied together, and the Peshastin Canal can actually be supplemented with icicle water by way of a crossover pipe. And the crossover pipe is kind of down there in the kind of lower Peshastin, Big Y interchange area. You'll see some construction later this fall. They're actually replacing that crossover pipe later this year. On Icicle Creek, they divert up to 117 CFS, and flows are supplemented by storage releases. I was just out there the other day on a tour, and they're pulling about 105 CFS right now. So project goals, we want to complete a water acquisition with Icicle and Peshastin Irrigation District in order to improve icicle flows by 3 CFS and Peshastin Creek flows by 2 CFS. The improvements that they would make with the proceeds of the water sale would be invested in on-canal projects that would be integrated into a future pumpback project. And so I'll talk in a little bit here about the pumpback project. I want to talk a little bit here about how we're addressing the flow benefits. We had initially talked to the irrigation district, and we were trying to figure out where we could acquire water for in-stream flow benefit. And we had talked about an all icicle approach, an all Peshastin approach, or a combination approach. And after working through some various options with them, the district was most comfortable with proceeding with this split approach. So there'd be 3 CFS benefit in icicle and 2 in Peshastin. In terms of where the benefit would be, the 2 CFS would be from their diversion, their main Peshastin diversion, down to the confluence. At least that's the Peshastin benefit. So we would be adding, there'd be 2 CFS that we would be adding to the current 3 CFS low flow. So we'd be going from 3 to 5. The Icicle Creek diversion, what we'd see in the hatchery reach, the historic channel, we'd be adding 3 CFS to the 10 CFS, or as you can see from that previous photo or less, flow in the hatchery reach. In terms of biological priorities, for Icicle Creek, the unacceptable limiting factors include summer base flow, For Peshastin Creek, unacceptable limiting factors include flow, summer base flow, as well as a host of other problems in lower Peshastin Creek, I think largely due to the highway construction that we're all familiar with. One thing that is interesting to us, and I think it's just a kind of a quirk in the prioritization strategy, is that there's currently the lower icicle reaches are unranked, and the lower Peshastin ones are ranked tiers 2 to 3. So it's a little bit, I mean, at least from our view as a sponsor, it's a little bit of a challenge having the icicle reaches unranked, because there are scoring factors in at least in the RTT criteria that you can't score points in if a reach is unranked. I mean, we all know that this is an important reach, and there's a large group called the Icicle Work Group trying to improve in-stream flows there. But because there's some missing data there, it's technically unranked. So it's disappointing to us not to be able to access some of those points there. But they're just making the point that I think we all know it's important to improve in-stream flows in Lower Icicle Creek. So I have a graphic here similar to the previous one to show you all how this would work. Why don't we start over on the left-hand side here with Icicle Creek, 140 CFS diversion, pre-project, they're taking up to 117. Post-project, they would be taking 114. The flows here, though, are not solely determined by the Icicle Irrigation District, right? And I'll show you a map of this, but we've got Leavenworth National Fish Hatchery, Cascade Orchard Irrigation Company, and the city of Leavenworth. And so, all of those entities are part of the Icicle Work Group, and they are participating in an effort to improve in-stream flows there. So, we tried to be conservative in what we think the sort of pre-project and post-project benefit would be. We are relying on some other projects to occur, however. And right now, this was, as of recent as of last year, I mean, there was less than 15 CFS in that historic channel. So based on those numbers, it's a significant increase, say to go from 10 to 13. On Peshastin Creek, it's a little simpler because on Peshastin, there's only one diversion down there at the bottom. I can talk about Tandy here in a second, but we know that they're required to leave 3 CFS in that fish ladder. So 3 CFS is what goes down into Lower Peshastin Creek. And so post-project here, instead of diverting that 20, they would be diverting only 18, and they would leave 5 CFS then in that fish ladder. And that's an easy thing to measure there too. There's a staff gauge there, and it's an easy thing to report. There is additional benefit to the Wenatchee River. We think it's, for the most part, insignificant. These are not tier 1 restoration areas that identify summer base flows as a problem under the prioritization strategy. Probably bigger projects worth looking at with other entities to improve in-stream flows in the main stem Wenatchee. So we're not suggesting here, like we did in the previous presentation, the main stem Wenatchee benefit. Dave, I'm going to pause here like you did on the previous project and see if there's any questions about the graphic I have. Are there any questions about how this would work?
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
Pre-project 433, post-project 438 in the downstream section of the Wenatchee. Then you go down to that last reach in the Wenatchee, and it's 433 and 436.
Oh. Yeah, that's a
What's-
typo.
Copy.
That's a typo.
Okay.
It should be 5 CFS, so that's a typo. Thanks,
Okay.
John.
John Arterburn, go ahead.
Okay, Mike, on this one, my question has to do with the fact that you've identified that you have several partners in the icicle work group and several places where you can find water in the icicle. This is really the only player in Peshastin Creek, and it really is the only diversion there, and there's a lot less water in Peshastin Creek. Is there any opportunity to potentially redevelop this in a way that you left 5 CFS all in Peshastin Creek and you didn't add any water to the icicle?
Yeah, that's a great question, John, and we explored that with the irrigation district, and they're not prepared to do that at this time. And that's kind of, I mean, I think when we had talked with you guys, when Dan had talked with you guys in August, that was our preference, and the irrigation district was not able to do that right now.
So are you saying that the maximum they would work with you on was the additional 2 CFS?
In Peshastin Creek, yes.
Okay, thank you. I just needed the clarification on that.
Yep. No, it's a good question. We had a lot of conversations with them about that, and because of the intertie with their system and some of their long-term planning, they were only prepared to do what we're presenting.
So Mike, this is Tracy. Just a real quick question. I think when Dan gave the presentation, he had indicated that IPID would pledge up to 10 CFS, and that's what I had in my notes. And then the application comes in with only 5. What happened to the other 50% that the IPID would pledge to this project?
Yeah, so, and I think I have a slide about this, Tracy. So the 10 CFS is what Icicle Peshastin Irrigation District has pledged for conservation for in-stream flow in Icicle Creek. That's part of the Icicle strategy, right? So it's not, I saw those notes, Dan had sent me notes about that. And so it was not 10 CFS for this application. They've committed long-term, over the life of the Icicle strategy to a 10 CFS improvement in Icicle Creek.
Okay, thank you.
And basically what you're looking at now is we're trying to get 3 of that. We were trying to get 3 out of the 10 in Icicle Creek with this application.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to move on then. So we have a Peshastin Creek fish periodicity table, and most of you are more qualified than I am to speak to this. But just in terms of what's going on in Peshastin Creek, I mean, we have rearing for spring Chinook, steelhead, and bull trout, and then different life stages for spawning, incubation, in-migration, etc. This information, we include this stuff in some of the work we do around the pumpback station, which I'll talk about. But again, I'm happy to entertain questions on this. But clearly, I mean, we will be, if you just focus in on the irrigation season, that May 1 to October 1. So it's really that the rightmost quarter of the timeline. I mean, that's where the primary benefit for the in-stream flow improvement would be seen for those life stages. So I'm going to take you on your virtual tour, since we didn't get to go on a tour, and it probably would have been canceled anyway with all the smoke and the fires. I want to orient you to the Icicle and Peshastin systems. Just so I think the graphic that I had previously was helpful, but I want to show a little more detail here. So the lines that you're seeing on this map are canal locations. And so starting down here in the lower left-hand corner, this is the icicle diversion. So this is where they divert 117 up to 117 CFS off of Icicle Creek. And then it goes down the canal. And then there's a couple of bifurcations here. One bifurcation sends it over across the Wenatchee River, where there's another bifurcation, and some of that goes back up into that ski hill area, upper Leavenworth, Chumstick area. And at that bifurcation, it also hangs a right and snakes along the northern bank of all the orchards, on that northern side of the Wenatchee River. Back at this original bifurcation, it also hugs along the orchard line and heads southeast towards Peshastin Creek. So that's where in this area, that's where there's the crossover, because the blue is the Peshastin Irrigation District. So there's a Peshastin diversion, about 2.5 miles up Peshastin Creek. They divert water, goes into this blue ditch and serves all the way down, snakes around, and then dumps out in Cashmere in Brender Creek. Icicle, on the other hand, extends all the way down and actually dumps out in Fairview Canyon at Monitor. So it has a pretty high elevation. It looks like they're pretty close here on the map, but the Icicle one is much higher elevation than the Peshastin one. I mentioned a couple times that there's another diversion on Peshastin, this Tandy diversion, this upper diversion that they had inherited years ago. They just pulled a handful of CFS out of there now and serve a little bit of orchard, and a lot of that's being converted up here to residential. And then they inherited this, what they call the GIB system, which is a system of pipes around the Big Y interchange, kind of near the Big Y Cafe restaurant. So that's their system. Back to the tour. This is the Peshastin Creek diversion. So we're looking downstream off to, you can see in the middle of the screen, this is the diversion dam. Used to extend all the way across Peshastin Creek. The diversion over here, this goes into the canal. They have a fish screen right here behind this kind of green looking fence. And then this is the fish ladder that we built with them several years ago. So before a fish ladder, this is what it looked like, right? So it's pretty daunting fish to get through there. I kind of went down memory lane a little bit here, looking at some of the old photos of building this project and just constructing it. And some of you might remember Joy Juleson, who worked with us and was out there doing some defishing. Don't tell Joy that I shared this photo of her, please. On Peshastin Creek, this is a shot of lower Peshastin below the diversion at 10 CFS. So I was going to go yesterday. There's in the last 2 weeks they've had about 3 CFS in Peshastin Creek. Couldn't grab a photo of that, but this is what 10 CFS looks like. I'll tell you, I mean, if you've seen it at 3 CFS, it's hard to see the flow there. I mean, there's pockets here and there, but it's hard to see the flow.
Hey, Mike, you have 30 minutes remaining.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dave. On the icicle diversion, obviously this is taking a pretty high flow. We are looking up Icicle Creek. Icicle Creek is coming towards us. It goes river right or off to the left here into the canal, and it goes river left or to our right into Icicle Creek. There's actually underneath here is the diversion dam, and you could see that if you went out there now. It's just overwhelmed by flow right now. And this is also the area like the Peshastin where they install flashboards, basically 2x8s, and put visqueen or plastic behind that to push water over to the canal. So some of the complexities of Icicle Creek, and I won't spend too much time on this, but I just wanted to describe to you, if you're not familiar, what's going on in Icicle Creek. So this is one of the maps we use in the Icicle work group. This is the Icicle Creek subbasin. It's a whole bunch of reservoirs: Square, Aqua, 8 Mile, Kolchak, Upper and Lower Snow, Nada. And these reservoirs are owned and managed by the Icicle Irrigation District, the Shaston Irrigation District, and the Leavenworth National Fish Hatchery. And down here at the bottom, you have 4 entities who pull water out of Icicle Creek: the Irrigation District, City of Leavenworth, the Fish Hatchery, and the Cascade Orchard Irrigation Company. And so this is like, this just shows you kind of what's going on in Icicle. There's a large group, the Icicle work group, working on improving in-stream flows in Icicle Creek. Just a couple more photos of the same spot, looking at low flows in that historic channel. This is 2021. This was 2015, right? So that was 2015 and 2005 are some pretty common years for us to evaluate and consider when we're looking at low flows, right? So it's essentially like zero flow in Icicle Creek at the historic channel during some years. Just one last thing. There is a lot of investment, and there's going to continue to be a lot of investment in Icicle Creek. This is the pool below the boulder field. I wanted to point this one out because now there are fish going through the boulder field, so there are actually fewer fish that are hanging out in this pool. But we were out there last week, saw some fish spawning up above the boulder field, saw some people fly fishing there. So it's pretty interesting to see the changes. If you haven't been out there to see it, you should definitely join a tour sometime. The climate science flow projection, similar to the previous presentation, we took these Icicle numbers and worked with UW to understand, the impacts on the Chihuahua, and they're pretty similar. 13 to 40% decrease in base flows and a 2.5 degree C increase by 2040, right? So in our lifetime, and we're going to see a significant shift to the hydrograph over 3 weeks, likely by 2040. In terms of future opportunities in Icicle Creek and how this project is kind of nested within the overall improvement in Icicle Creek, the goal of the work group is to have 60 CFS minimum flow during drought years and 100 CFS in non-drought years in that historic channel. So in that photo where it's dry, in a drought year in 2015, say, our goal is that there be 60 CFS there. I think for Tracy, this answers your again, the question you had about the 10 CFS. So the current proposal to acquire 3 CFS is part of that larger 10 CFS that the irrigation district has committed to the Icicle strategy for Icicle Creek. There are other projects that we're hoping for that will contribute to in-stream flow: 8 Mile Lake restoration, automation, pump back projects, fish hatchery. Fish hatchery is making some significant improvements right now, installing circular tanks and a new intake system. So I think things are, generally speaking, promising for Icicle Creek. Shaston Creek, we don't have that many tools. We have the current proposal to acquire 2 CFS, which would provide a nice bump. We also have the pump back project. And so I want to talk a little bit about that pump back project. And some of you have been, you've participated in some conversations about the pump back, and you'll see more this fall on that. But in terms of how this integrates with the water acquisition for the Shaston Icicle systems. So in working with the irrigation district, we look at this water acquisition as kind of a phase 1 for the pump back, because they would be able to, with the proceeds of the sale, they would be able to start canal improvements now. And these improvements would persist, right? They would not be undone by a future pumpback project. It has a couple of benefits for us. One, it will reduce the costs of the pumpback if we make some of those investments now rather than later. And that is extremely helpful when we're looking for the kind of money that we're looking for the pumpback. You know, I think you all have seen cost estimates in the $25 to $30 million range for construction of the pumpback system. So we can start to chip away at some of those costs now. It makes the pumpback down the road a lot more viable. And we have the immediate effect of reducing the diversions now. We'd see the immediate in-stream flow benefit, and it would also reduce the amount of water that's pumped in the future, right? Because this is going to be a permanent reduction to the water right portfolio of the irrigation districts in both Peshastin and Icicle. Just one more detail on the pumpback is that we have a number of options that we're looking at. In all scenarios for the pumpback, the Peshastin Creek diversion will be eliminated. And so you guys will have some workshops later this fall about the status of this work. Let me pause there, Dave, and see if there are any questions about what I just covered, you know, going back to, you know, some of the work in Icicle and Peshastin and kind of the bigger picture, because the next part is, I'm not sure if I need to cover it very much. It's similar slides to what I covered in the last presentation. And I should do a time check with you too, Dave, to see how we're doing.
Sure thing. Yeah, you have 22 minutes remaining.
Okay. Are there any questions about what I've covered so far on the benefits to Icicle and Peshastin and how this integrates with other projects in both Icicle and Peshastin? Okay. You're supposed to wait 8 seconds, right? Okay. All right, I'm gonna just walk through these very quickly then. I already presented, you know, the historic cost estimates that we're seeing for water acquisition, some of the recent work that we've done, some of which are confidential, but I can disclose some of the acre foot amount, and particularly that third bullet, you know, we're seeing in some special circumstances in the Wenatchee Basin, some pretty high dollar amounts for water acquisition. The cost estimate for per acre foot for Icicle and Peshastin water is slightly higher, we believe. We think the range is going to be a little bit higher than Chihuahua or Clear Creek because of some of the regulatory implications in Icicle Creek. And so we don't, you know, we feel very comfortable with this number, this $3,500 per acre foot. It's possible it comes in at a little higher, but we're in working with the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program. We are, you know, we'll access the plan is we would access the 4.8 million for surfboard funding, and then whatever, if there is a cost that exceeds what we put in our budget, that would also be covered by the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program. So we've tried to be conservative but realistic in the numbers, and we feel pretty good about where we are there. We have had some preliminary discussions with the Colville tribes on water acquisition as well, and it's possible that they might consider participating in the Icicle Peshastin project and maybe the Chihuahua Clear Creek acquisition as well. So we've been talking with Matt Young. I covered this pretty well in terms of how water acquisition works, right? You do evaluation. It's not the same. It's like a yellow book appraisal for a land acquisition. There's a range of value. This is all outlined in both the RCO policy and the Columbia Basin Water Transactions Program policy. Ecology does a report of examination. We're fortunate in this proposal and in the previous one that there has been a lot of work done to get to this point. So we're very comfortable with both proposals about moving into the report of examination. There's a purchase and sale agreement, and then the water gets put into the trust program. I talked previously about compliance monitoring, and so there will be kind of a three-party compliance monitoring scheme where the county, under the QLE program, we're required to go do compliance monitoring. The Department of Ecology will require reports from the irrigation district, and the irrigation district is required to provide information. So all of that is covered in the agreements and in the trust water transfer document. Again, benefits of a water acquisition these days, it's much more cost effective than, and I think maybe this is historically true as well, it's much more cost effective than doing an engineering and construction project. There's certainty and simplicity with it, and it also gives the irrigation district the ability to strategically make improvements on their system, you know, when they need to and how they need to. We've worked with them to do some of this work. You know, they have Ice School in Peshestan has a professional staff that does a lot of this work. So there are some cases where they don't put a project out to bid, they actually do it themselves, right? And that can certainly make something a lot more cost effective. I covered some of the project comps earlier. I was trying to address a question that came up at the August meeting, just trying to show kind of the ballpark for how much these projects can cost. And you know, if you do the math here in some of these projects, you know, like MVID and Pioneer, I mean, they were done several years ago. You know, it's on the order of $800,000 to $1 million a CFS, right, for these large projects. And you know, of course, these projects will be much more expensive now. And so the water value piece and the acquisition really is very competitive compared to what it would cost to go construct these projects.
Hey, Mike, can I ask a quick question on that slide?
Yeah,
so
please
like
do.
For those comps, and I mean, you referred to it in the last presentation, like for MVID, and what of like, say the 10 million for MVID, what was, you know, there was a whole lot of groundwork associated with that. So what was the breakdown, like percentage wise, of cost for the water part, and then the cost for all the construction that went on in all the wells that were installed and all kind of the fallout of the Save Water? Do you have any idea? Are there any comps where it's just a water transaction, like from the water transactions program, where you've just had water with no infrastructure?
Right. Yeah, a couple things on the cost, and I don't want to speak to like in too much detail about these projects. I wasn't directly involved in MVID or the Pioneer project. The numbers that we have came from a report that Anchor QEA had put together, and the costs were largely based on reported design and construction costs. We're having this exact conversation in the iSchool work group about how much does it cost to build a project, and how much, you know, where does the funding come from, and how can we count things as match, and how can we leverage funds? So I would say what we're finding in that exercise is that when we report costs, like in a surfboard report, we are underrepresenting the total cost of actually doing the project, right? Because if I were to count like the 10 years of work we've done, you know, with Wenatchee Chihuahua Irrigation District to get where we are now, you know, the cost would be a lot higher, but we typically don't include those costs. On the Columbia Basin program, there were no water transactions in the Wenatchee Basin from 2015 to 2022 to current day. And so we don't have any comps on water transactions in the Wenatchee Basin through that program. They have other comps, you know, and that you will see that. You'll see some comps in that West Water report. That's an attachment to our surfboard application. But they're reaching out to other areas beyond the Wenatchee Basin to talk about comps. I think they even use our Lake Chelan as a comp, right? Because there haven't been any in the Wenatchee Basin. I would say, John, just to build on that, I mean, that's, you know, when we applied to be a qualified local entity, we had to submit a plan of work. We only submitted a plan of work for the Wenatchee Basin because we have a water acquisition strategy there. And it was very attractive to the Columbia Basin program and to BPA because it's been very difficult to acquire water and improve in-stream flows in the Wenatchee Basin. So I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, John. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, more or less. You know, I think it's just difficult without a lot of comps out there to kind of bring something in. But I'm just trying to wrap my head around like the difference in costs, like with projects that are doing really significant infrastructure efficiencies to kind of improve water, as opposed to one that's just a diversion shift. So it's, you know, it's just on paper. That, and then those monies like that the districts are getting, then they put, you know, they're going to take that and go somewhere else with those funds to do something else. So I'm just trying to figure out like how all this stuff, how it all equates, and what, you know, really the key to me in trying to figure some of this stuff out is like what benefit is this to the fish and the streams. And you're looking at some numbers like in the historic channel on Icicle, there's so much going on the left hand of that stream, and there's plenty of water, but the historical channel we know has been kind of, you know, it's diverted away from that. So it's like, well, if you plop 3 CFS to 1 or 2 CFS, what really are you getting from that in terms of fish habitat? And so I'm just trying to figure out how that cost piece fits into this. So yeah, thanks. I know it's complicated, and water is very expensive. So yep. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say, John, one direct comp I have is that if you, we did an estimate on what it would cost to install, I think it was 18 or 24 inch pipe in the upper 4.5 miles of the Wenatchee Chihuahua Canal. And it was in today's prices, you know, it was over $7 million, something $6-7 million to do that. And the water savings is the same as what we're proposing in the water acquisition, right? So it's not completely apples to apples, but it's pretty similar in that, you know, we know with pretty good confidence how much the water acquisition is going to cost, and we have a pretty good idea of how much, if you just did a straight up piping project, you know, it would be $1 million, $1.2 million more expensive to do the piping project.
Hey, Mike,
so
you
again,
have
it's
about 10 minutes remaining.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Dave, how much time?
10 minutes.
Yeah, great.
So Mike, this is Tracy again. I got an algebra question for you since you like to talk algebra. So if you are successful and you get, you know, the 3 CFS from Icicle Creek and the 2 CFS, then the water right, as I understand it, would go down to 114 for Icicle and 47 for Peshastin. Now, if you're also successful moving forward with the pumping stations and having everything in pipe and under pressure, how would this project interact with that? In other words, their water right would still be 114 and 47, even under a pumping system, but clearly I don't think they would need that much water under, you know, using the pump. So how would this project interact with the pumping project?
Yeah. Yeah, let me talk about Peshastin Creek, because I think we've talked about this a little bit before. It'd be good to address it now. You know, and let me start with that variable rate idea, right? So on Peshastin, they can divert up to like 48.8. Let's just say 48, right? And then they reduce it by 2, so it'd be 46. Late season, I mean, what they're saying, you know, what we're saying in this acquisition is that there's always going to be an additional 2 CFS as a result of this acquisition. If and when we build the pump back system, they will be allowed to divert 2 CFS less than what they are diverting from Peshastin Creek, like right now during low flow season, right? So they can't move down to, you know, say the Wenatchee River down in Dryden and pull out 46, you know, the 48 minus 2, 46 CFS. It's tied to the amount that they were able to get during low flow periods. The reason for that is because they could have a significant impact on other downstream water rights holders, right? So all of a sudden, you know, where they were diverting, you know, 20 or 17, you know, CFS out of Peshastin Creek, and they build the pump station, they start pulling out 46, right? Well, they'll be impairing any number of users. And then to John's point in the earlier presentation, you know, then all those phone calls for those 44 interruptibles, they come way earlier, right? And so that will be in the report of examination, that it will be very clear how that's going to work, because we cannot have that kind of impairment, and it's not allowed for those interruptibles. So Tracy, I want to use that as maybe the example to talk about there, but let me know, did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's helpful. I was just looking at this as if you know, if you're not able to secure the funding for this 5 CFS, and then later the pumping station goes in and they're still using less flow because it's a pressurized system and they may end up using less flow, well, then we've just saved ourselves, you know, several $1 million because you know, they're not able to use all the flow that they have a right to under a pumping system. So I was just trying to look at this as how it interacts with the pumping system, and are we spending money on flow that they wouldn't be using anyhow if they had the pump system?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a good question. The answer is that their diversion and whether it's on Peshastin or through the pumping station, it will be further reduced by the amount that we purchase now.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, they don't get, you don't get to sort of get additional benefit because of the pipe. The piping is going to be, you know, any conservation that occurs because of piping is going to be subtracted as well, because that's part of the efficiency project. I feel like I should do another graphic on this to explain the algebra on this. So I think I probably will, just for the, you know, for future pump back conversation, just so we can kind of explain how this would work. Because it's a fair point, Tracy, about what is the interaction with a future pump back station, and so we'll work on a graphic to try to answer that.
Looks like John Arterburn has a question as well. Go ahead, John.
Mike, I have a little bit off question for you, and I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot. You're usually pretty good about this sort of thing. But I know that we'll be considering, you have 2 projects submitted. There's $5 million. We can only select a project, really, at the end of the day. And so you have 2 projects competing with one another. And I'm assuming you're hopeful that you'll get both of them funded under some revenue stream. So my question to you is one of these projects or the other more likely to be competitive in some of the other infrastructure money that's out there? Because that might be helpful in leaning our thoughts towards one or the other.
Yeah, I like both these projects, John. It's like, you know, picking between your kids. But I would say that Icicle and Peshastin projects lend themselves more to infrastructure funding than the Chihuahua Clear Creek projects. We have this additional opportunity in Clear Creek to do the restoration component that hinges on getting the irrigation district out of Clear Creek. So there's great opportunity there. It doesn't necessarily line up as well with infrastructure funds. Part of the reason I say that is because of the Icicle work group. You know, the Icicle work group is now going through a kind of a budget forecasting and looking at future infrastructure opportunities. And we already have Bureau Water Smart funding that goes into the Icicle strategy. And I think projects like Icicle and Peshastin lend themselves well to future infrastructure funds. I would say in general, water acquisitions are difficult there are fewer funding opportunities to pay for water acquisitions, right? You can't buy water with the Bureau Water Smart grant, say, for example. And so I think that kind of trends, I can't pick a project, John, but I can say that there are more funding opportunities, I believe, for Icicle and Peshastin than there are for the Chihuahua Clear Creek.
Well, and I appreciate the difficulty of that question, but I appreciate your being honest and trying to give us an answer. Thanks, Mike.
Just a quick time check. There's 2.5 minutes remaining.
Dave, I did not walk through, and I don't intend to start walking through all the citizen committee criteria here now with 2 minutes remaining. But there were a couple categories in here that I did want to point out for the citizen committee, and it's really kind of, I'm reaching back to the other project too, but we've been working with the irrigation district boards for years on these projects. There's a lot of community and board support for these projects. It helps improve, improving an irrigation district helps improve the long-term viability of an irrigation district and the customers, the ag and residential customers that they serve. It reduces regulatory risk. They're on the hot seat, for having an impact on flows. And so the more they can do, to get off of that hot seat, the better. And, in terms of economics, it's a good investment to invest in local infrastructure. And we think it's really cost effective, to do a water acquisition versus kind of a straight up engineering and construction project. So with that, Dave, I can entertain any more questions, but I think we're just about at time, aren't we?
We are, yeah. We are sub 1 minute.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for just spending the time to do this. This is an add-on for all of us, and it's pretty cool though to be looking at dollar amounts that are kind of commensurate with the kind of project opportunities that are out there. So while it is trying, I think, for us to sort of add meetings and add workload, there's some pretty cool opportunities out here. So we hope you like the projects that we presented. We hope they're in the ballpark of what you're looking for. We hope that you rank and score them at the top of the list. So appreciate you guys entertaining our presentation, and good luck. I think you have some hard work to do.
Well, thanks, Mike. We appreciate your presentations today. We can now transition towards the Nason Creek State Route 207. Chris Butler of the Yakima Nation will be presenting that proposal. Chris, I will go ahead and make you presenter.
Okay, just a minute.
Hi, everyone. Dave, will you acknowledge that you can see the presentation, please?
Yes, I can see the presentation. Though it's
All
not
right.
full screen. Do you want to make that full screen?
I can't see your screen. All I can see is the presentation.
Yeah, on your side, could you, I think you can right click and make it full screen just so we don't see your taskbar.
Let's try it on here. Huh. That is weird.
Actually, if you click view at the top left corner, and then you can scroll down to full screen mode. That's better.
Is that better? Thank you for walking me through. Okay, my name is Chris Butler, and I'm a habitat fisheries biologist with the Yakima Nation, and I'm here to present our project, Nason Creek and State Route 207, Phase 1. Additionally on this call is Hans Smith to jump in on anything that I might have forgotten to mention. Our goal here today is to provide you with information in regards to the project history, desired outcomes, project development, and the current processes. So Nason Creek is a tributary to the Wenatchee River, is 27 miles in length, drains nearly 8,000 square miles, and the elevation ranges from 1,880 feet up to 4,200 feet at the headwaters. The assessment unit is a rank 2 and is a priority for both protection and restoration for current resident stocks. Our project partners are Washington State Department of Transportation and the United States Forest Service. The goal for this project area is to reduce WashDOT's long-term maintenance issues between State Route 207 and Nason Creek interactions while incorporating habitat restoration actions that would benefit aquatic environment. More specific, this project will restore quality salmon habitat and habitat sustaining natural processes in a high priority restoration segment of Nason Creek by addressing the Upper Columbia Region technical team's listed priority ecological concerns and project actions in a cost-effective manner. The footprint of this entire project area or phases 1 through 3 in Nason Creek are between River Mile 3.2 and 4.6. Nason Creek and State Route 207 mostly run parallel to each other from the southwest to the northeast. The project area is 1 river miles in length. The property owners are federal, Chelan County, and private land owners upstream and downstream of this project area. Bonneville power lines run across Nason Creek, which can be seen in this photo. And the utilities, we have Chelan County PUD, Zipley Fiber, and T-Mobile. The species of concern for this project are Upper Columbia Spring Chinook, Upper Columbia Steelhead, bull trout, and the life stages that this project addresses is holding, spawning, summer rearing, and winter rearing habitat. To have a better understanding of this project area, this historic glow map from 1900 can help kind of explain this story. The map indicates the historic path of Nason Creek along with the roadway alignment, which at that time was called State Highway 15C. This is now known as either Ritchie Road or U.S. Forest Service Road 6603 and or 6604, depending on your audience. The red arrow indicates this road as you can see it leaving Highway 2 at that time and heading towards Lake Wenatchee along the hillside of the east slope. This slide shows the current alignment of Nason Creek, which is identified in the light blue from the hydraulic model of our 1.5 year flood event. The purple channel is where the historic alignment used to be from the glow map from the previous slide. And again, the red arrow indicates Ritchie Road. So there's just kind of a lay of the way everything's sitting. When you observe the LiDAR image, I'm sorry. When you observe the LiDAR image
on the left, you can visually identify how the floodplain is bisected and reduced in size by the roadway. The infrastructure is forcing Nason Creek's energy and velocity into a direction that is not geologically stable. This has had a direct result of highway and floodway interactions, which has resulted in extensive road damage and continuous road maintenance, which leads to a continuous impact on our listed species. If this is left unchecked, Nason Creek will continue its path along the roadway and WashDOT will be forced to continue its infrastructure protection. So I want to be perfectly clear here. With the right flood events, you would expect to see a reinforced roadway for much of the road's length as seen in the picture on the right. Nason Creek has a lot of guiding documents or assessment work that has been done in the past. Between the State Bureau of Rec, Chelan County, and now the Yakima Nation, there's a lot of information for us to digest. When we started on our project survey and concept development in the fall of 2018, this was our starting point. The common theme identified throughout all documents was the straightening of State Route 207 in the 1940s within the floodplain. The current road alignment constricted the floodplain, rerouted the channel in some locations, cut off meanders, accelerated flows, and altered sediment routing. It is clearly recommended that the biggest biological benefit for Nason Creek would be to remove State Route 207 out of the floodplain. So I took some direct quotes out of some of these documents. The state highway cut off a large oxbow near Nason Creek. That was the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board in 2007. The most significant anthropogenic impact was from an improved road, State Route 207, that longitudinally bisected the floodplain, Reclamation 2011. The state highway, railroad, and private land development affected large wood recruitment, channel migration, and channel recruitment. That was the Upper Columbia RTT in 2017. Following realignment of state highway that bisects the floodplain, the creek has been eroding State Route 207 in several locations. WashDOT's report in 2019 and construction of Highway 207 significantly reduced the size of the river migration corridor, resulting in a reduction in stream length that was interfluve in 2021. So chronic environmental deficiency sites. When the new alignment of State Route 207 was constructed down the center of the floodplain in the early 1940s, Nason Creek was nearly 100 feet away from the highway prism in our project area. In November of 1995, a flood event on Nason Creek washed out a portion of State Route 207 and has provided a continuous engagement of the road prism since. State Route 207 road prism currently interacts with Nason Creek's channel at 3 locations, which are now listed by WashDOT as chronic environmental deficiency sites, and these locations are indicated in the circles of yellow. The Chronic Environmental Deficiency Program evaluates sites along the state highway system where recent or frequent and chronic issues continue. The infrastructure for protecting State Route 207 from Nason Creek has resulted in a reduced amount of aquatic habitat and an increase in amount of hardened bank surface. So project development. Our concepts here. So when we began our partnership with WashDOT in 2018 for this project, the concepts that we developed in time, which are great for improving salmon habitat while protecting infrastructure, we're trying to work with the road in place. Here we have an example of that concept with 2 of the CED sites. The real problem is that we were still not addressing the real issue of the roadway in the floodplain. In 2011 and 2012, Chelan County's Natural Resource Department looked at removing State Route 207 when they completed an alternatives analysis and a feasibility study of this same area. At that time, Chelan County looked at 6 different alignment options for State Route 207 relocation. That would be the picture on the right as an example of those alignments. Each color represents a different road alignment potential. Additionally, Chelan County looked at a causeway, bridges, partial reconnections, or in this case, culverts, engineered log structures, and then of course a no action alternative. As you might expect, the result of the professional opinion was to remove the road from the floodplain. When designs on our original concepts that we developed in 2019, we went down a similar path of analyzing all of these potential alternatives. We did not really consider a causeway, but we did look at the use of bridges. All the benefits and arguments remain the same as they did 10 years ago for these alternatives that were considered. The professional opinion is still the same for removing the road out of the floodplain. However, the cost has gone up considerably for these. In December of 2020, the Yakima Nation came up with the idea of a partial road removal, which is the picture on top. The new alignment alternative has not been reviewed or suggested in the previous studies mentioned. The new proposed alignment for State Route 207 would reduce Nason Creek and State Route 207 interactions altogether, while providing the biggest biological benefit by removing infrastructure out of the floodplain. We presented this idea to our project partners in January of 2021. Both partners agreed that this was probably something we should consider and were supportive of investigating. In May of 2021, we developed a feasibility analysis for State Route 207 realignment, which is that portion of the roadway highlighted in yellow in the picture below. And that contract was awarded to Petit, a consultant firm out of Wenatchee. So we came out with our feasibility assessment and we had several goals. We wanted to ensure Highway 207 maintains efficient and safe traffic flow similar to the current conditions by constructing to the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Office standard. We wanted to minimize impacts of Highway 207 to Nason Creek and the associated critical areas and promote salmon habitat restoration opportunities. We wanted to decrease ongoing flooding impacts and damage to the highway road prism. We wanted to minimize earthwork and impacts to the U.S. Forest Service land and avoid impacting private lands with the new highway alignment. If we look at the concept drawing to the right, you can see that State Route 207 bisecting the floodplain along with the two CED sites identified with the pictures of them expanded to the left. The black line represents our concept of the road realignment. From this concept drawing, you can see that the proposed roadway is removed completely out of the floodplain. The new road alignment avoids private land ownerships and sensitive areas. The proposed alignment does not require any special requirements such as accounting for avalanche measures, and it avoids the BPA power infrastructure. With the goals outlined in the contract, Petit created 3 separate concepts or potential alignment options on the Forest Service property that met the current American Association of State Highway and Transportation's office requirements. Each concept alternative alignment produced corresponds to a potential speed limit. So in this case, 35, 45, and 55 miles per hour. The cost varies from 7 million to 11.5 million for those speed limits. Despite the cost differences, all 3 options appear to be feasible based on the goals and parameters that were set. This 35-mile-an-hour alignment concept is constructible when you combine the funds of the Yakima Nation, Washington State Department of Transportation, and the large cap grant together. The speed limit actually controls the roadway design. So what I mean by this is, for example, would be the horizontal curve radius, elevation differences, vertical curves, and sight distance. As you increase speed, your vertical curves and sight distance needs to increase. This 45 mile per hour alignment concept is constructible when you combine the funds of the Yakima Nation, WashDOT, and the large cap grant together. Obviously, excuse me, all the proposed concepts would remove State Route 207 and Nason Creek interactions altogether, but more importantly, 2 of WashDOT's CED sites. Removing State Route 207 will allow Nason Creek the opportunity to reestablish a connection with 12.9 acres of disconnected floodplain and remnant side channel habitats. This 55 mile per hour alignment concept is currently not achievable when you combine only those funds of the Yakima Nation, WashDOT, and the Capital Funding Grant. This is why the Yakima Nation, through our project partnership with the United States Forest Service, has targeted funding through the Central Washington's Initiative and the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Investment. If these additional funds are acquired, the 55 mile per hour alignment concept is constructible, making all three alignment concepts a reality. The project is likely to receive much attention, and we knew from past examples that it will require a rigorous process to move it forward. We also understood that funding this project would still be the largest hurdle to get over. In the spring of 2022, the Yakima Nation adopted Chelan County's Natural Resource Department's 2011 Alternatives Analysis and 2012's Feasibility Study, while incorporating both the Yakima Nation's concepts road realignment option and the large wood into these studies. The Supplemental Alternatives Analysis document reevaluates all alternatives and costs and specs that are associated with each alternative. A result from this document is the matrix table. To better establish a relative score for comparing all the alternatives in the document, the matrix table had been constructed. It uses the attributes identified in the box below, which follows methods used by Chelan County in their 2012 feasibility analysis. As scoring is somewhat subjective, each scored alternative was given a color code. So green exceeds objective criteria, yellow adequately meets the objective criteria, orange only partially meets the objective criteria, and red does not meet the objective or potentially has fatal flaws. Some attributes are non-numerical in that they're either a pass, fail, or currently unknown, and then the sum of occurrences of color can be seen in the far right column for all the alternatives. For review, the photo provides here an example or incorporates the Yakima Nation road alignment with the previous 6 alignments from 2011. In this case, alternatives 1 through 7 move the road away from Nason Creek within the body of the document. Each alignment is discussed in detail. So for example, impacts such as fill or having to mitigate for avalanches are discussed. The benefits, each alignment, is removing the road out of the floodplain and avoids wetlands, stuff like that. Though I won't really be going over the supplemental alternatives analysis or the matrix table in great detail today, I will identify that the alternative 7 or the Yakima Nation road realignment option has the most criteria meeting or exceeding the objectives. Based on the output of the alternatives analysis matrix, the Yakima Nation, WashDOT, and the United States Forest Service recommend further work be conducted regarding alternative 7. This option will eliminate hardened infrastructure from the aquatic environment and restore a more natural physical habitat condition that better supports fish survival and production. Currently, the existing highway and the road protection infrastructure, and I have the 2 CED sites circled in red, decreases the vegetation cover, decreases stream bank roughness and complexity, induces roadway contaminants from rainfall runoff and snow removal, and prohibits fish access to the floodplain habitats such as side channels and wetlands where productive off-channel rearing habitat exists. If implemented, the project will increase active floodplain size and level of connectivity, create channel length, and allow for the development of new meanders. Floodwater attenuation sediment storage capacity will increase, as will riparian vegetation cover over the fish-bearing waters. The amount of diverse and complex stream habitat will be significantly increased. All of these benefits should significantly increase the capacity of Nason Creek to support rearing juvenile salmons and more holding and spawning adults due to the increase of habitat availability and habitat quality. So I'll do my best to walk you through the actual proposed view of the project. As we get started on this review, I would like to remind everyone that the proposed concept avoids private property and is only identified on federally managed lands. For those of you familiar with State Route 207 and Highway 2, Coles Corner would just be out of view at the bottom of your screen. The red line represents the proposed road alignment, and the shaded gray areas indicate the area of road removal within each slide. The icon in the right-hand corner points to our location of where we are within each picture along the alignment of the proposed alignment. This is what you would expect to see when you turn on to State Route 207 when leaving Highway 2. When you turned onto 207, the alignment will start to veer to the east instead of the normal straight route that you see here. As we follow State Route 207 realignment options, excuse me, you're going to notice clearing limits already created by Chelan County PUD and the original highway alignment prior to 1943. This is the U.S. Forest Service Road 6603 that I had discussed earlier. A large portion of our concept actually follows along these already cleared limits. However, the road alignment would require additional clearing limits to meet the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Office standard. That is fun to say. This view is simply showing the cut through the trees where it's coming around to the new alignment. Photo 5 does a pretty good job of showing how the alignment avoids the PPA tower. Additionally, by removing the grade area of the roadway, it completely removes State Route and 207 from interacting with Nason Creek in the future. Oops. This view shows how the proposed alignment will engage with the previous alignment, and again, with the shaded areas being removed and allowing Nason Creek full access to its floodplain. So talk a little bit more about the prior attempts. In 2012, the idea of removing the road out of the floodplain was supported by Chelan County, Washington State Department of Transportation, the United States Forest Service, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Yakima Nation, and probably many other entities that were not mentioned. Different alignments were preferred over others by each entity for one reason or another. For instance, several alignments had a large portion of fill into the floodplain associated with them, or some alignments had to deal with or mitigate for avalanche issues. The largest issue or concern at that time was the actual cost associated with each alignment. And the cost is what kept this project from moving forward in 2012. As mentioned earlier, the preferred alignment identified in option 7 is supported by the project partners, WSDOT, United States Forest Service, and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. The advantages of this road alignment is it meets the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Office's standard. It moves the road away from Nason Creek from River Mile 3.9 through 4.5, which eliminates the two most active CED sites. It removes the road from inhibiting river access to the historic floodplain, channel migration zone, and improves aquatic habitat complexity. It avoids avalanche hazard areas, avoids private property, and this alignment is constructible if awarded the large cap grant. And it sets the stage for future options of removing additional road out of the floodplain. Attaining funding for the realignment of State Route 207 in 2012 kept this project from moving forward. This is why the Yakima Nation, along with our project partners, have secured $3.8 million for phase 1 of this project. That currently is not enough funding to secure any of the concepts alignments provided here today. However, if we incorporate the large cap grant funding along with our funds, this project is constructible for the 35 and 45 mile per hour speed limits. The Yakima Nation has met with our project partner, the United States Forest Service, to try and secure additional funding through either the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Investment and the Central Washington Initiative for additional expenses to accommodate for the 55 mile an hour speed limit. So kind of a recap of events. The Yakima Nation is completed and is working towards the following. In 2018, we completed our initial survey of Nason Creek from river mile 3.2 to 4.6. We developed our concepts and presented those to WashDOT. In 2020, our program identified another potential road realignment alternative, and this turned a single project into a three-phased project. In 2021, the Yakima Nation conducted their feasibility study and concept development for the road realignment option. Also in 2021, the Yakima Nation WashDOT secured $3.8 million for State Route 207 realignment option. In 2022, Yakima Nation created the supplemental alternatives analysis document. Additionally, this year, we have begun our 30% designs for the 45-mile-an-hour speed limit concept. We also have submitted for this application process for the large grant, and we've targeted additional funds with the Forest Service. Our next steps, we're going to continue to solicit for funding from the different committees for design and construction. We're going to continue our discussions of our findings and continue to coordinate with our project partners, Washington State Department of Transportation, the United States Forest Service, and Bonneville Power Administration. We're going to continue coordination efforts with utilities, private landowners, Chelan County, special interest groups, and overall public outreach. We'll continue coordination efforts with permitting agencies. Currently, we are working towards permit level designs of State Route 207 for the 45-mile-an-hour speed limit. And we're going to go to construction of this project realignment option in 2025. I'd like to take a moment and say thank you to everyone for this time to present this project and the ability to submit for funding through this process. Additionally, we would like to thank our project partners and other government agencies for support letters that we have provided as part of our application process. At this time, I'll entertain any questions you might have.
John Crandall, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. I got a question. You know, I look at this project and you know, I see the proposed alignment kind of loops out, gets away from two of these riprap issue areas, and then goes right back down to the creek and flows through more places with issues. But in that, if I'm reading the LiDAR right, yeah, that's a good image right there. In that eastern, call it half, you've got a lot of, you know, floodplain inundation, I guess is at the 100-year. That seemed to be, if I'm reading it right, seemed to be the result of two culverts, one at the, you know, the west end of that half and one at the east end. And I'm wondering what the you know, I saw the matrix of issues and I haven't read up on all the other alternatives, so that's my bad on that. But I'm just wondering, when were those culverts installed on that east half, and what was the cost of that, and how, like, what has the result of that work been?
So
was all of that area not inundated prior to those culverts? So how is that? You know, it seems to me that's a good
Chelan,
case.
yeah, so Chelan County introduced those culverts in 2008, if I believe I have that correct. And that's what connected that east side of the channel. As far as the success of that, I couldn't speak on that. There might be others on the phone that could.
Do you know the cost of that culvert project?
You know, I don't.
Can I jump in
go
on
ahead,
this?
Hans. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the culverts, you know, have certainly provided hydrology to that cutoff segment of the floodplain since they're installed. I believe they were installed in 2007. There's still risk with those culverts. I mean, the upstream culvert that provides flow, you know, into the majority of the site comes from a side channel that is right along the road prism that is risk of being disconnected by channel avulsion and being plugged off because of actions taking place underneath the power line and connected with the CED site that we're trying to address, the lower CED site we're trying to address in this project. So the culverts are good from a temporary fix standpoint, but there's a lot of long-term risk in whether or not they're going to perform as designed. And so there's issues with the current culverts in terms of that, I guess, benefit in design life. I don't know what the costs of those culverts were, but I can also say that there was an analysis done on culverts in the area that we're proposing to realign the roadway, and it was not supported both from the hydraulics and from the underlying land managers that would support culverts being used, except for just like a backwater alcove culvert at the lower end, which wouldn't have nearly as much habitat value as creating a flow through scenario. So there's a lot more energy. You have the main thread of the channel along the CED site that we're proposing to realign the highway, whereas the culvert that is feeding that floodplain system is being fed by a side channel. It does not have that scouring energy pointed at it when they installed that culvert. So those are some kind of differences in the actual hydraulic conditions between those two areas.
And to kind of follow up on that, I mean, I guess I'm just looking at this, and I think in your proposal you mentioned a phase 3. Is that correct? Like that would be addressing the road on that eastern half of the floodplain there. What does that look like, and does implementation of this phase 1 hinder the potential for phase 3? And what are some thoughts on what would happen in phasing? Is this another realignment that you're going to have then get this really sinuous roadway? I'm just kind of thinking about like how drivers would approach that, and kind of looking at the figure here, you see that the purple line really is the alignment that gets the road out in one fell swoop. And I'm sure it's crazy expensive, but this all is. And so I guess I'm wondering what are thoughts on how you would address that eastern half if given the the issues that are being seen there with the culverts, some kind of fix is going to get in there. So how would phase 1 integrate with phase 3 in your vision? Thanks.
So, John, phase 1 obviously gets the road removed from the floodplain. And what's been causing the problems, as you know, for getting the entire road out of the floodplain is the cost. I mean, in this picture, and I can actually probably go to a better picture, but E there, that yellow area in the coloring, is the major contributor for the costs. Avalanche issues is what you have to mitigate for. And actually, they found out through the reports and survey work that both options, this is option 6 and the blue line is option 5, both are actually impacted by avalanche situations, where options 1 through 4 deal with fill and private property, and all options impact private property. So that's what drives that price up considerably. I mean, option 6, just for the road and mitigation, the estimate was at 35 million. And if we're, we've been very open and honest that this is, the preferred project would be to get the entire road out of the floodplain, but where you come up with 35 million. So kind of what it does is it sets the stage for the future for getting that next portion out of the floodplain. So our phases 1 gets that one portion out. Our phase 2 and 3 are restoration work with that other section of roadway still in place.
Okay, so there is no future. So by doing this phase 1, that's kind of it. Like, I mean, it gets the road out of the floodplain, but not entirely. That the road still goes through that whole eastern half.
Yes.
Splits it. So this is only a partial fix to a full problem. And I guess I'm just trying to, I thought phase 3 was going to be more road work, but if it's not and it's just restoration, then I get it.
No,
So,
it's phase 2 and 3 are habitat restoration projects that we've already developed concepts for, and it's working with the road in place. And so what's important to see here is that we're working and trying to make sure that we're not changing the functions of those culverts.
copy.
So
Thank you.
that's why you see that alignment coming in where you do.
Got it.
So what we're gaining is that floodplain to the south. This road right now is running, just so everyone knows, north and south. Sorry for the confusion.
Hey, Chris, for a time check, you have 25 minutes remaining.
All right, thank you, Dave.
Hi, Chris. This is Steve Fortney. I have a question, John Crandall, if you're done with your questions. Yes, just to kind of piggyback on John Crandall's questions about the segment of 207 downstream of the segment that's being proposed in this funding application. I did get a chance to look at the alternatives analysis, and you know, alternative 1 is is really intriguing to me, just because even though there is a significant amount of fill that would be required for alternative 1 to move forward, it is located at the toe of that colluvial slope, and it seems like it would be out of the way of the avalanches. I don't know what the you know, constraint, the private property constraints would be, but there would be like a 430% increase in the amount of floodplain that would be reconnected with alternative 1, as opposed to the alternative that's being currently proposed. And so my question is, you know, and I think that alternative 1 was estimated in that alternatives analysis at 16.8 million. And the 55-mile-per-hour alternative that's being proposed here is, I think you had mentioned, it's close to 11 million. So it's another 5 million, and it might even be more than that. But I was wondering if you had considered that alternative, or when in the process did you consider or settle on a preferred alternative when you found out about the large cap funding opportunity? Had you already decided on this current preferred alternative before you found out about the large cap funding opportunity, or would there be another round of kind of decision making and alternatives analysis now that you know that there's, you know, a $5 million grant that's available?
Yeah, I'll try and address all your questions in there, Steve, and it's a great question. So we started working on this supplemental alternatives analysis in March, and that was prior to the announcement of this capital funding grant. And it has every option on here, including the accommodation and the large wood structures and everything. And like we indicated, this is kind of subjective, but you could see how everything rated out. And when you're looking at the sum of occurrences in the far right column. So when you were talking about alignment 1, so, you know, there were some qualities when you go and look at the matrix table, which everything's uploaded. There's a ton of information there. You can see why certain areas, or why it only scored 6 that were, you know, exceeds the objective, and 6 adequately meets, and then what the other issues are. And it kind of goes through in detail, but just to call some of it out from here. So one of the reasons why alignment 1 was not preferred is because of it still keeps infrastructure in the floodplain, and it also filled in a large portion of channel. And then I had that picture up, which I'm sorry for jumping around here, guys. I'm probably going to make everybody seasick here. But you have wetlands down at this lower section, and you would have wetland impacts. And I mean, for those of you that are familiar with working with Department of Ecology and having wetland impacts, it's a struggle. So technically, you got to be able to show that you're going to create more than you're going to impact if you're changing those. I think I might have addressed your question there.
Chris, one thing he asked that we want to make clear is we actually did identify alternative 7 and have been moving forward with alternative 7 as our preferred project before this grant came along as well, Steve. So that was part of your question, and just want to identify that, you know, we didn't decide to prioritize it to match the funding opportunity based on a lot of outreach we've already done and talk with the partners. You know, it's arrived as a preferred alternative that, you know, doesn't trip us up into the constraints that have been identified in the previous list of alternatives, which alternative 1 was included in, which was what was not supported for moving forward with. So, you know, there's environmental concerns with alternative 1, and obviously the higher level of cost, and in the impacts to the private properties. You know, those are the types of things that have made us focus on alternative 7 as a better alternative at this time, because it's more feasible to implement, and executing alternative 7 actually doesn't preclude a future ability to do something like alternative 1. And so I know that was kind of something John had alluded to as well, is, you know, Chris has stated in this presentation, you can still build these other alignments off of what we're doing. You know, you're getting a significant portion in dealing with 2 of the major offending CED sites through this project now. But you can build off this and still try to do the rest of the realignments in the future, and we're supportive of those things happening. But why not, you know, why not get this benefit when it's in hand right now?
Thanks for the response, guys.
This is John again. I got a question. Chris, can you, like, one thing I didn't really see in this presentation is, like, what is the existing habitat in that 12 acres of area that will be reconnected? Do you envision the main stem occupying what I can see on the LiDAR is looks like a primary side channel? Like, what's going on in there that's going to provide benefit for fish? And I guess I'm just curious what that looks like, you know, in terms of inundation at low flow. You know, it looks like the main stem's going to want to punch right through that spot at that upper red arrow there. It just seems like if there's a lot of energy coming down that upstream straightaway, that will become the main stem. Is that your expectation? And then what would you expect in what is now the main stem in terms? I'm just wondering what's like a flow split. Is this could it just avulse into that and you'll lose that upper half there? So what do you expect in terms of the habitat, not necessarily the road? How is the river going to respond to your action?
Well, you're asking me to predict the future, and if I could do that.
Well, I mean, it just seems like an engineer would have an idea of what, when you take that road out, there should be some idea,
Yeah,
like based on elevations, what will happen.
Yeah, so currently when we take the road out, and part of phase 2 gets at some of this, which is we're going to roughen up the current channel, and we expect to see split flows, and we expect to see wetland production, and water storage, you know, because now it's connected to the floodplain. But, you know, how long that's going to take to happen, you know, I can't predict that, but we're going to basically, the model shows that we have a system that is very connected, both channels, because we're proposing to roughen it up, and there's going to be uh, water basically in both locations during high runoff, and then depending on those flows and depending on what the channel does over time. Yeah, it historically used to be there, and it wants to be there because it keeps wiping out the road. I mean, the bed is tilted that direction.
Yeah, I guess that's why I was just asking. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like
I think that bottom picture there is a really good example of what you could expect if you're familiar with this site. We have this natural structure that developed, and we have a split flow condition. And so we have what you can't see in this picture is water in that bottom picture flowing to your left. But you can see the water that's going straight down parallel to the road, which is what feeds those culverts, or feeds the one culvert before it comes back to the main stem. And I think that's a better picture of what you would expect to see.
John,
Okay.
I'd also add that, this is the breakdown of the phase 1, phase 2 concept. So, phase 1 is dealing with the road and the road infrastructure in the floodplain. Phase 2, which we're not seeking funding for through this process right now, but our intention is to build it right on the heels of phase 1, is more of the in-stream habitat restoration components. But it's hard to design phase 2 if you don't know if you're going to accomplish phase 1 or not. So as soon as we're really certain, then we can move forward with realigning this highway. We're going to be developing the rest, in-stream and side channel restoration prescriptions for the remainder of that zone. That is the phase 2 project.
This is Steve Fortney. I have a question related to phase 2, and I think that there were some drawings included in one of the supplemental documents that you included with the application, but I thought one of the drawings included plans for what to do with existing 207 road prism in that area. And I wasn't clear if there were plans to excavate the entirety of the material in that road prism and move it off site, or just to excavate part of it, or leave the rest, or what the plan is. I was just wondering if you could speak about some kind of initial ideas of what you're thinking about, what to do with the existing 207 road prism.
Yeah, so you're referring to one of the attachments, which was our concepts for this reach, which would, what we were just talking about, building to once we know the direction we're going to move forward with. But what we would do is we would dig down, and your goal is to match existing topography. So, we get down to those levels. Basically, you're going to go and remove all the fill that they put in there. And then we're going to go in and replant in some areas. We're going to maybe create some wetlands in some areas. And typically what that means is you got to dig down just a little bit to get in contact with that water table, and then create those wetlands to interact with Nason Creek. So all that fill would leave.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Chris, you have 12 minutes remaining.
Thank you.
So Chris, this is Tracy. I have a quick question for you. I think it's easier than the previous questions, but you are going to reconnect 12.9 acres of floodplain in this project, and you have 3 concepts, your 35, 45, and 55 mile an hour alignments. Will the amount of floodplain reconnected stay the same regardless of the concept that you pick? In other words, as you go from $7 million to $12 million, is the amount of floodplain fixed, or will you actually gain more floodplain with maybe a 55-mile-an-hour versus a 35-mile-an-hour concept?
No, so in this picture, the purple line that I refer to that as the south floodplain. So each speed limit, doesn't matter the speed limit, you gain that 12.9. You're not gaining something more. The alignment at the top end changes. So when I'm saying the top end, I'm referring to the far right. This picture isn't drawn well, but that connection point, because of your speed, if that was chosen as a 55-mile-an-hour speed, that turning radius is wider and longer. So, you know, that connection point is what changes. And same with the other end, but you still gain the 12.9 acres regardless.
Yeah, good.
You gain that whole southern floodplain that you see there.
Yep. Answer my question.
Yep, thank you.
Hey, Chris, this is John again. It'll be my last question.
Well, let's just do a site visit, John.
Yeah, no, I just like, so, you know, I am a bit familiar with the site. So my sense is people blast down that road like at really high rates of speed. I could easily see 60 and 70-mile-an-hour people, you know, cruising down that. If this results, like, do you have any idea like what is going to be more doable? I mean, obviously the cost of a 35-mile-an-hour road is going to be more cost effective than a 45. So you would, in terms of cost benefit, you'd shoot for a 35. How is the public going to react to that? Have you gotten any sense from locals or, you know, politicians on how they would view a road that, you know, probably people are driving 60, 70 being cut down to 35 miles an hour for that section? You know, how do you think that's going to play out? Have you gotten any feedback on that? Seems like a big step.
No. Yeah,
Okay.
in short, no. I mean, to be perfectly honest here, this process, as I've identified, is we've been trying to make it a very strong push going forward, and so it's been a very rigorous process between, you know, the survey and the feasibility study to the supplemental alternatives analysis now, and then we've shared that with our project partners, and we've gotten feedback. So everything's been taking time, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And so we're getting ready to ramp up to bring this to the public. And the reason why we, you know, looked at 3 concepts, which we weren't even upfront sure that they were all going to be, you know, the same alignment with different speed limits, or whether it was going to be something totally different. But I think the public process, you know, we want to get the public's input, which is why we've have not been like dead set, this is where we're going. Now, if you talk with our project partners, as you can imagine, when you're going from the north to the south, which would be your right to your left, you know, they're coming around these corners, they're coming to a stop sign. And when you're turning off Highway 2, you're leaving a stop sign. So forcing someone to slow down to a 35, I don't think it'd be an issue. This whole design could be a 35, 45, 55. What I'm getting at is we don't know. The public process needs to help drive this. And yes, the roads or the cars going down that road are going extremely fast because they can. And the other, you know, I've mentioned it before, the average daily cars going down that road for over a year is over 2,000 a day. And I mean, so it gets a lot of use, and the majority of that use comes in the period of 3.5 months.
It looks like Bruce Maraghi of the Chelan County Citizen Advisory Committee has raised his hand. So go ahead, Bruce.
Just to carry on with that point, I live a couple miles away from this project, so I'm fairly familiar with the driving, the load of cars on the road and the territory in general. Excuse me. It is definitely a 60, 70 mile an hour thing. Usually not the locals. Usually it's people that just came over Stevens Pass, or they're here camping and they're in a big hurry to get to Leavenworth to do whatever. And I have a funny feeling the general public would, the folks that live here would say, fine, that'll slow traffic down in that area. And besides that, after the project area to the north, there's still a lot along straightaway that they'll punch it up to 60 or 70 again before they reach the campground area where they turn off for the lake. Curious about no comments from the locals yet. I imagine people there in the development that'll be getting a road closer to them than farther away might have something to say, but there'll be few of them. But generally, I think this is going to be a fairly positive thing as far as what the public feedback is going to be, at least up in this area.
Oh, thank you, Bruce.
And Chris, for time, you have 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I honestly, I don't have a lot more to input here. We're, like I said, we're going down the process, and we hope to have a lot more stuff to report in the future. And like I said, the next big task is to start our public process, where we'll start getting a lot of feedback on all of this.
Are there other questions for Chris? Okay, Chris. I think that's
All right.
everything.
Well, from Hans and I, we thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Indeed.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Hans. Okay, folks. Well, just to wrap things up, thanks again for everyone for turning out. For you project sponsors, thanks for the great work in putting together your proposals. We will go ahead and end a few minutes early. We're wrapping up about 5 minutes early. So again, for RTT, as you're all aware, you'll continue after lunch. Citizen Advisory Committee members are welcome to attend that session after lunch. And for the rest of you, thank you very much, and hope you all have a great rest of the afternoon.
How much time for lunch, Dave?
I believe 2:15 is the beginning of the RTT session. Tracy Hillman, is that accurate?
Yep, 2:15.
All right, see you at 2:15.
Thanks.
Thank you.